Got
Hey,
it.
well, yeah, great. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I have sometimes really enjoyed kind of nice, tight groups like this, smaller groups, because it makes a lot of room for us to engage and wrestle with ideas that are challenging sometimes. So I'm excited about this. I'll start off by saying my name is Ryan. I use they and them pronouns, and I'm one of the two co founding trainers of Heartset Training Center. And we're relatively new, less than a year old. And we kind of grew out of some of the work that we were doing based in Philadelphia, working for a Housing First agency and doing training around housing first and harm reduction and other best practices in supportive housing settings. And so, what would a training catalog be without a ethics training? It's something that is often required uh, through regulatory bodies, but it's also something that, when we can get down into it, can be really useful and fun to talk about. At a minimum, useful, I hope. So my background is mostly in mental health care and substance use, kind of co-occurring disorders. I'm working in homelessness settings now, doing a little bit of outreach and some homeless dispatch on our hotline here in Philadelphia. And I think I'm most interested in talking about ethics that really push the boundaries of what kind of mainstream care um, thinks is acceptable. But I think we're going to just kind of talk through the basics and get a really firm grasp on what standard and typical and ethical practice can and should look like. Okay, I'll kick it over to my co-presenter to introduce himself.
Thanks, Ryan. Can you repeat the checking question? Or was there?
There was no
Okay,
checking question.
okay.
Yeah, say whatever you want about yourself.
The format sounded very like, and I'm interested in ethics because like that sort of thing. So, hello everybody. My name is Colin Martin. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Um, and I am the other founding trainer of Heartset Training Center, along with Ryan. So, we really enjoyed the training space. I also really appreciate the education space and just being able to talk about best practice and not have to do it sometimes just feels really nice. But rest assured, Ryan and I are trying to do this work the best that we can to in our own ways. So what that looks like for me in my own life is I am a therapist full time. That's what pays my bills, is what I like to tell people. But I also do some per diem crisis response for agencies that experience like a workplace crisis. I might be the person kind of intervening and helping folks move forward as an agency, and that's been quite fun and intense. But ethics are fun and can be fun if we make them fun. There's a lot of opportunities for engagement here, so looking forward to getting to hear what you all think and about your own experiences in your workspaces.
All right. I want to kind of hit you with some shared expectations, folks. It is a long training that we have today, and ethics can get dry if we let it, right? So, our encouragement here on this slide and what we're expecting from you is that you engage with us, right? I think if you kind of walk away or start checking emails, I think it makes it harder for the rest of us to get the most out of a session like this that we can. So we're asking that people engage in dialogue. Again, we've tried to build in a number of places throughout the training where we'll get a chance to share feedback with each other about what our practice is looking like, what ethical dilemmas we've faced in our practice so far, what challenges there are. And so we want to hear from you about those things. I want to gently encourage folks uh, to use your screen today, to have your screens on. I see a couple people do. Um, we just would love to see your faces. If you're able to turn on your camera, it can help us feel a sense of togetherness in a group like this. And I think Khalil and I will have a better sense of what is landing for folks and what is not. If you give me the stink eye, I'll know. Nope, that's not the direction to go, right? So just encouraging folks to use your camera if you can. I want you to feel free to disagree with us, right? Ethics is a contested space. It is a space that there's no one right way to do things. And so we're encouraging folks to push back against any of the things that we share or to enter into disagreement if that feels right. We want to hear that too, not just the affirmative or positive stuff, right? So feel free to share that. We are going to be managing clock time throughout the session, and we're going to offer a couple of breaks because it is such a long session. So hang in there until the breaks. If our discussions run long, we may like put a lid on some of them just in the interest of getting to all the content. But don't feel kind of put off by that. Just want to make sure we cover everything. Lastly, since I have the registration list, should be within the hour of this session, you'll receive a copy of the slides of today's session and a copy of the materials that we're going to use today. So you can look out for that in your inbox. Additionally, we are going to offer a session evaluation right at the end. We want you to know, like, we want to know what you thought about the session and whether it was helpful, whether there are parts that you didn't find helpful, and kind of your overall impressions of the session. That helps us learn and grow as we go. I think that's it for expectations. So here is what we hope you'll get out of this session today. By the end of this session, in addition to this and so much more, we hope at a minimum you'll be able to list at least two ethical considerations, two kind of components of ethical decision making that are going to impact those decisions, right? Two things that are present at a minimum in all of our decisions that are going to have that impact. We want you to know about it, be able to self assess it, and be able to work through decisions using those considerations. We also want you to be able to explain the 7 principles of something called the ethical principles screen. Um, it's a way of, well, we'll talk more about it. We want you to be able to at least list them and explain them at a baseline understanding. And then finally, we want you to be able to apply the stages of ethical decision making to analyze a client scenario. So we are going to do some breakout groups near the end of the session where we talk amongst ourselves about a case that should be somewhat familiar to your practice. It shouldn't be that out of left field. And we want you to be able to use those ethical decision making tools to arrive at a decision that you feel comfortable with as a group. Here's how we're going to get there, doing some welcomes and intros. And by way of intro, we're going to ask some questions using a poll in a moment about some ethical dilemmas maybe you've faced. Then we'll dive into understanding privacy and confidentiality, a key factor in care, not just like social services care and supportive housing care across any kind of medical industry, bioethics, etc. Research, even privacy and confidentiality is so important. And so we want to understand it as it applies to us and the clients that we serve. We'll spend some time unpacking boundaries. This is a fun topic to talk about. There are good boundaries, there are bad boundaries, and then there's all this gray area in between. So we want to unpack that. We'll talk about dual relationships and clarify how do we navigate, how do we move when we have multiple types of relationship with the same person. We'll talk about some best practices for self-disclosure. I understand there may be some peer specialists with us today, and I know peer specialists make it kind of an expert, that's their expertise, right? Being able to kind of self-disclose and share what is relevant to their recovery journeys in the interest of supporting folks. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll also spend some time exploring a very specific ethical decision-making framework. There are so many of them out there. If you just type in ethical dilemma into the internet, you'll get so many different things. We have a framework that we like to use. It comes out of the social work literature, but this isn't the end all be all, but I do think it will be a helpful tool for you as you go through your practice. Finally, we'll do some case scenario breakout groups. That'll be fun. And then we'll do some questions, some Q&A time, some key takeaways, and we'll offer some next steps on your ethical practice journey. Okay. I didn't list when the breaks will be, but we'll try to take a break at least every hour. So just to give you a chance to, stretch your legs, fill up your water, fill up your coffee sock, whatever it is, and come back energized. Okay, so diving in, I see your comment, Sunshine, by the way, about having to leave early. Thanks for letting us know. We appreciate that. So we have a poll that I'm going to launch here, and it's going to ask you to let us know how often you've experienced ethical dilemmas over the past year, and in what area. Like, what was the kind of ethical challenge that was coming up. So I'm going to launch that poll now, give folks a few minutes to look that over. First question says, in the last year, how many ethical dilemmas have you faced? And there's a range of numbers. And then the second question says, if you answered at least one, which of the following areas of practice came up, and check all that apply. So I'm really curious about this. We'll give folks a few moments to complete the poll. I see the answers ticking in. This is great. I'm excited to share this data with you. All right, one more minute. Okay, we did it. Everybody voted. Thank you. That's the first time I've ever gotten 100% participation in a poll, so I love it. Thanks, Shanaz. I see your comment there. Appreciate it. I'm sure you don't look as bad as you think, but we're glad to have you here. Okay, I'm sharing the results of this poll. So let's look at this for a second. I asked you how many ethical dilemmas you think you faced in the last year, and the largest group, the largest portion, say that they faced about 3 to 4 ethical dilemmas in the last year, and so maybe one every 3 months or so in your practice. That's interesting to note. The second highest would be 1 to 2. One person marked that there were no ethical dilemmas in the last year, and then one person marked 5 to 10 ethical dilemmas in the last year. Nobody marked 10 plus, which is great. I feel fortunate for you that you didn't have to deal with ethical dilemmas 10 plus times in a year. Looking at the areas where people reported these ethical dilemmas in, and you were able to check off multiple, looks like 82% of people, 82% of the votes marked personal or professional boundaries as like the major area where ethical dilemmas came up. Having to set boundaries, having people cross your boundaries, how to delineate between your personal and your professional, and even there's things that go beyond client care into what are my boundaries with my supervisor, right? How do I say no to these tasks? How do I leave on time? How do I arrive when I'm supposed to instead of an hour early to get notes done, right? There's so much that goes into boundaries. So I'm glad we're going to get a chance to talk through that. The next two highest areas would be self-disclosure, right? What do we say about ourselves? And privacy and confidentiality. So ethical dilemmas there. I love to be in the moment when a social worker from a hospital calls me and is asking for info about a client. And now I know I'm not allowed to share that info, but I also know this person is going to be lost to care without me making that connection, right? And so that's tricky. It's tricky to know when and how to share information, and do we cross lines sometimes? And what potential does that have for the work that we're doing? Negative potential. All right. So thanks for sharing your experiences, folks. A couple of people, let me reshare that. A couple of people marked other. 3 people marked other in terms of ethical dilemma areas. I would love for folks to just unmute really quickly and shout out what other areas beyond the ones listed here were you thinking of? Really curious to know what other ethical dilemmas folks are facing.
When the government is making decisions about your job that are counter to your personal and professional values.
Oof, yes, a conflict in values between like these larger administrative structures and
Who
essentially
find your funding?
Yes, these are the ones that hold the purse strings, right? These are the ones that make it possible for this work to happen. They pay our salaries, they pay for program costs, they pay for everything, right? Uh, and yet they are holding us to a set of values that do not match either us personally or even sometimes the values of the agency in the first place, right? An agency is often started with a set of values and things that we believe, and now the funder is saying, no, you can't do it that way, right? And so what do we do? Yeah, that's a very interesting one. What else? Other folks that marked other, two other people marked other. I'm curious what things are coming up for you with ethical dilemmas.
This is Shanaz. I actually marked other as well, as far as just looking at the news and seeing all of this information regarding our programming, and our programming is directly funded by, these programs that may receive these cuts. And I'm finding myself, how much do I reveal to my participants? What do I tell them? Because they're also reading the same, they're watching the news, and they're looking at these articles too. And it's like they're looking at me for answers, and I'm on the same boat. I don't know what to say. I really don't know that has been really tricky for like since January. So that's been really tricky to navigate.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I that's not the direction I thought you were going to go, but I love hearing what you're saying, because what you're talking about is this conflict of, I think what I'm hearing is that you like to kind of operate in transparency with your clients, right? You like to be with some disclosure with your clients. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you that, of course, is going to build a stronger, more trustful relationship, right? Right, when we can be transparent about the work, about what we're doing, about our agency, and yet we are at a dearth of information. We don't have information to share. Even if we did, is it appropriate, right? Even in our personal lives, when people just start like shouting headlines at me, oh, did you hear about X, Y, and Z? Did you hear about this that they're doing? It sort of just like riles you up, and I'm not sure that it's that helpful either. And so, how do you take in that information, and what do you do with it? I see you
Exactly.
unmuted again. Did you want to add something there?
No, just exactly what you're saying. That's like,
Hmm.
what do I share? What do I hold back?
Hmm.
Just on the other side of it, you are privy to some information, but do you share that? And it's like,
Yeah,
it's just a whirlwind right now.
yeah, it's a lot. And of course, like outside of the ethical space, it has this like negative impact on our mental health and like our self care too, right? So yeah, big stuff. One other person I think marked other. Did you want to share whoever that was? What other ethical area you were thinking of when you marked that?
So with me, I feel like it's sometimes when I have people who circle back through services and tend to not follow through. There is sometimes that personal dilemma to not want to think that things will always be the same for this individual or this family, and that they're not going to do what I need them to do or ask them to do. That's kind of what my ethical dilemma is sometimes.
Yeah, it's like you've seen this pattern play out before, and you you have limited time available, right? Limited time to help people. And there's only so much you can do. There's only so many resources out there. And if I know that this group of people is not going to do what they need to do, is my time better spent serving somebody else, right? Yeah, that's a tough one. That's tricky.
Yeah, I can folks hear me? Can you hear me, Ryan?
Yeah, yeah. Mhm.
I really appreciate both of these examples, the news examples and like the like higher like governmental example, and the example that you just gave, Holly, because I think we talk about ethics in a very like, okay, now we're going to talk about ethics sort of way. But I think if we like pull it back, or like pull back the curtain or peek behind the curtain, whatever I suck at metaphors, but whatever that saying is, that we're actually having these conversations and workshopping these things so much, especially if you work in a harm reduction space. We're like, wait a minute, a lot of agencies and organizations don't exist in this way. Here's what we're doing. And it might feel like a dilemma for some folks. Um, And in what you were saying, Holly, I also think about we're doing a series right now on the idea of vicarious trauma and that shift in worldview that you're describing right now, right? As being like an ethical dilemma for you potentially, right? That idea of like, I'm less hopeful for this client, for this family system, for these people now because of this thing that happened. What do I do about it? Um, we are looking at that through like the vicarious trauma lens in that series, but here it's like, wait a minute, this actually feels like an ethical dilemma because I'm not providing the best care that I can, maybe if that's what's happening to me, right? So I love these examples too. I just wanted to chime in and mention those things.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, folks. We appreciate that. Okay, get your thinking caps on. I want to give you some statements on the screen that maybe somebody would describe as an ethical dilemma, and I just want to kind of get your gut reaction, right? A little bit of a discussion here around what would you do in this scenario, okay? And they're just like one-liners. They're not that complex, but there are some complicated ideas, I think, built in. Okay, you're serving a family, or you're serving maybe an older person who has adult daughters, and some of them want their dad to go into a nursing home. Others want him to remain home, right? I'm thinking about the supportive housing space. The supportive housing spaces I've worked in, we want people to be as independent for as long as they can in their homes, right? What do you think? What would you do? How would you handle this? There's a conflict of some kind here, and I'm curious to kind of just hear your initial gut reaction. And I think folks can feel free to just like unmute and chime right in. We're a small enough group that if
I
we
feel
talk
like I
over
have
each
to
other,
ask a question here. Is the
go for it.
father my client?
Say it one more time. Is the father
Is
your
the
client?
father my client, or is it maybe?
Yes, the father is your client. Mm-hmm.
And I take it he's is it assumed that he's not able to provide any preference or input on this?
I don't think I want to give any more information here, right? Like my thought here is we don't know all the information yet,
So
right? And so maybe part of your
first, what
process
would
is
I
to
do
gather that.
what would I do is explore what the father's preferences or goals might be here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I see you nodding, Holly. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, literally my comment was going to be, what is the father's wants? What does he want? What does my client want? That's the first thing I
Yep.
feel like you need to evaluate in this scenario.
Yeah. So here's my next. Now I'll add a little bit more info. Oh, did somebody else want to chime in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I would also explore what the father's abilities are and what the what kind of services we can put in the home, if that's what the daughters, if the daughters are available to help. But basically just focusing on what the father's abilities are, that's creating that option. Or could we explore other options as home modifications or assisted living?
Yeah, I mean, there's some reason why some of the daughters feel that he needs to go into a nursing home. Those could be physical reasons. They could be cognitive reasons, right? Those are usually the two reasons why, if care is becoming too intense at home, maybe we're exploring care that other people can provide in a nursing home setting. But I think you're right to kind of dive in there. What about, anybody else want to add anything there? Okay. What if you're noticing some cognitive or physical impairment, but dad wants to stay at home? What are we thinking there? How do we proceed there? And I want to say that I really appreciate John and Holly saying that like client preferences are always at the top of my list as well, right? But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, completely. I mean, the client's going to be more receptive and more open to receiving care if they feel like they're making the decision. If they're a part of that major, again, it's their choice. I mean, they still have to be treated as human. But I would, if they wanted to stay in the home, see if we could do home incarceration, Lord Jesus, home modifications and
Feels like that sometimes.
services, making sure they have any, if they need depends, we would have that. We would have somebody bathing, just all that in-home support for them.
Okay, so your effort then would be to try and find some kind of middle ground between what some of the daughters want and maybe what the client wants. I see you unmuted, John. Go for it.
Yeah, I guess if you were offering a simple question and maybe suggesting a simple answer. I guess the next step for me would be to probably resource some evaluations for the father that might be good information for the family members
Yeah.
to be able to, either support or, advocate against their decisions.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if I'm putting words in your mouth here, but I wonder if what you're suggesting is that, like, if there's something more objective, right? It's not just us kind of shooting from the hip and saying, I don't think dad can stay in the home anymore because X, Y, and Z is happening. But if we have some sort of more formalized assessment, maybe that adds weight to whatever decision we end up wanting to kind of pursue. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not my field, but maybe occupational therapy or some kind of whatever the pathway is to sort of assess what this person's needs might be if
Yeah.
we're seeing signs that you're talking about.
Yep. Great. I love it. Anything else anybody wanted to add? Okay. There's no right answer. So I'm just going to move on. I like everything that you suggested. I think the big point here is that ethical dilemmas are going to start to pop up when we start finding conflicts between what some people want and what other people want, or between several values that we hold simultaneously in ourselves, right? And so I think we'll see that more as we go through. Here's the next one. Your client asks you if her fiance, who is also your client, is HIV positive. What do you think? I'm sure you've probably worked with people who know each other well, that are both on your caseload, or in this close case, they know each other very well. They're engaged to be married. What are we thinking?
I would simply just say I cannot disclose that information. I'm not the one to disclose that information. You would have to speak to your fiance regarding that information.
Ask them, you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
unless
basically.
list of information, unless they've given you prior permission written to share that protected information, then you can't say anything.
Okay, that sounds pretty cut and dry. Anything else?
Is there an ethical problem that landed you in this position in the first place? I mean, where
Go
you're
on.
treating, where you're actually a, I don't know, a case manager or some kind of providing service to I don't know, is there a
Partnered
conflict in
group.
serving both people?
I think so. Does it mean that we can't do it? No, I don't think necessarily. But this is a space where conflicts like this are going to come up, right? There are some dual relationships or some conflict of interest type stuff that can come up here. So it's worth thinking about. What if these people are sexually active and the partner with HIV doesn't want to share that they're HIV positive, potentially causing the other partner to contract HIV? Does it change your thoughts?
Would it be responsible enough to say to suggest maybe seeking medical attention if you're wanting clarity regarding your own health status without disclosing information about the other participant? Does that
I
make
see.
sense at all?
Yeah, so you're saying, okay, you want to know if they're HIV positive. I get that, but let's focus on you. We're focused on your health needs. Let me see if I can help facilitate some STI testing, right? Or HIV testing.
Right. Something, yes, in that nature, to where we're not talking about this participant, we're focusing on your health, and let's get answers for your health.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So a bit of a redirection, right? Let's refocus the energy on you. We're not here to talk about your fiance. Go on. Okay. I think I'll also suggest here that If they want to ask their fiance and they're having a hard time with it, how do we feel about facilitating that conversation? Does that feel like in our wheelhouse or something that feels possible?
Suggest maybe like family mediation or family counseling for that. I don't think that would be in me personally, my wheelhouse for, I don't want to mediate that particular conversation.
I see. It feels more, I think what I'm hearing you say is it feels more clinical than the kind of role that you use on a
Yeah,
daily basis.
it could potentially be. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Anything else that anybody wants to add here? Okay. All right. Third one. You're working in a kind of a community-based setting, and the community, you know, maybe you do community meetings there on site sometimes. Community seems to want more police, but all the workers, all your colleagues want better access to shelters, more funding for shelters, and there's a divide here between how to spend finite resources. How do you handle this? What are your thoughts here?
A lot of listening needs to take place between the two groups so that each group understands what the other side is asking for and why they want it. Listen to their fears and their worries about it and really make an attempt to understand. Because no decisions are going to be helpful or productive if people are not listening to each other.
Yeah, and I think that's a great comment because it's what you're saying, Laura, is it doesn't suggest any very specific course of action in one direction or another. We're meant to sort of like have these conversations in a togetherness way, right? But you can see that there's competing values here, right? Competing ideas about what is right for the community. And I think people in the profession often feel that they have the right idea because they're in it, they're in the muck every single day, doing the work, supporting people. And sometimes that is in conflict. I don't think it's that dissimilar from like a more conservative government administration saying we need to pull back funding for shelters, right? As we're kind of, or HUD funding, as we're kind of seeing now.
Well, and maybe there is some common ground, but it's not been brought up because the two sides haven't spoken directly to each other.
Sure.
You know, maybe the common ground is we all want a safe community. We want a community where everybody is safe, where business owners are safe, where people without homes are safe, where people walking from the parking lot to their office buildings are safe. So that's where you start. That's the starting point. That's the common goal.
Where's our common ground, and then how do we have that discussion together? Yeah, great. I like it. Okay, last one. An agency, I know this is very clinical sounding language here, but let's say an agency has a very specific therapeutic modality that they use, but the evidence seems to suggest using a different therapeutic modality, right? I've been reading the research literature, and it says for this issue that people are facing, we need to use this therapeutic modality. What do we do? Is there a conflict here? What's the problem?
I mean, I think advocacy is probably the only obvious solution here to me. And that, you know, somehow if we're responsible for for really advocating for our clients, then we may have to do that within our own organization.
Yeah, what if you know for a fact that this other way of doing the work is better? And if I don't do it that way, here's my question to you, John. Are you doing them a disservice by not by using the other way of providing care?
I mean, what are the consequences if I don't follow the requirements of the agency?
Absolutely. What I mean, I don't know if that's a rhetorical question or not, but you're gonna get written up, and you're gonna get written up again, and then you're gonna lose your job.
So again, I think advocacy is the one thing that I know I can do.
Mm.
Our homeless service community went through this many years ago when Housing First became best practice. When we finally had the research, the documentation, the data that showed that Housing First was best practice, because we had all done what we'd always done in the past, which was housing readiness. And it took a lot of education, and some agencies went along with it wholeheartedly and jumped right into it, and other agencies kind of went along with it kicking and screaming, because if they wanted the money, then that's what they were going to have to do to get it. And some agencies dropped out. They said, we don't want to do it that way, and so we're not going to participate in this system anymore if you're going to use the Housing First approach. And so we just kind of respectfully let them go. But over the years, we've seen Housing First work. It's been many years now. And so it takes a lot of education, as John used that word, advocacy. Change doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, I think the frustrating thing for frontline staff like us is yeah, but I see what I perceive to be harm happening right now to my clients who are not getting best care right now. The literature says this. I've been working in the field for X, Y, and Z amount of time. I know that this is the right way to do it. I bet those folks on the other side of the Housing First discussion felt the same way, actually. Well, no, you're forcing this down our throats and you're tying our funding to it. But we as an agency have been operating for 40 years now and doing it this way, and we know it helps people, right? And so that flip side of the coin is there too. So it's frustrating. It doesn't feel like a win-win scenario in that case. Okay. Again, not here to provide answers to these questions. Just wanted to kind of get your gut check reactions to some of these quick questions. And probably took too long doing that, but let's move on into some more didactic content, some more learning opportunities. Khalil, is this me? I'm sorry.
Yes, I've got boundaries coming
Great.
up. I could take this.
Awesome.
You've been talking about if you want to switch.
No, that's okay. I got it. All right. So privacy and confidentiality. A pretty basic and core concept to the practice of care for folks in our field. And it's the basic idea that information is entrusted from one person to another. And that is opening the door, right? I am opening myself to you as a client. And so I'm sort of waiving some right to privacy there by giving you that information. But my expectation when I give you that information is that you're not going to divulge that, right? You're not going to share it with other people. Otherwise, I'm probably not going to share very much with you, right? Those are the basic kind of dually aligned concepts of privacy and confidentiality. So let's talk about why it's important. Number one, if you are working in this field, you're a professional of some kind. Many of us have specific professional bodies that we're connected to. Khalil and I are social workers. So the NASW operates a code of ethics. Peer specialists have their own code of ethics. Public health workers have their own code of ethics. Community health workers. There's all these different codes of ethics. And so one of the reasons why privacy and confidentiality are important is that I bet every care-related code of ethics places an obligation upon us, right, to respect people's right to privacy and confidentiality. So one of the reasons why confidentiality is important is because we are obligated to think so through our codes of ethics, right? Otherwise, it's not fair for me to call myself a social worker if I disregard all of these core components of the code of ethics, right? Confidentiality is also going to protect our participants' rights and anonymity. When I go see my doctor, I believe that I have a right to have that information protected. My whole health record, every single thing I say to my doctor. And the same is true for the clients that are seeking our care and that are receiving our support, right? So we're respecting their rights um, to privacy, but also some level of anonymity in the sense that if a person is receiving care in our program, that is not public knowledge, right? Just because I am receiving government dollars doesn't mean everybody in the world gets to know that my rent is subsidized, right? It is not public knowledge. That is, in fact, a confidential piece of information. Um, and I guess one of the kind of things that I want to share here is that there is actually a safety implication, right? I'm thinking a lot about some of the folks who um, are in a harm reduction, housing first type agency who may still connect with drug dealers. And we'll do home visits, and drug dealers will be outside of apartment buildings, sort of asking us what we're doing there. Who are you here to see, right? There are safety implications. If that person knows that they're in a program, maybe that they receive subsidy, maybe that they get SSI, all of a sudden that person becomes a target, a vulnerable target to people from the outside, right? And so just the mere fact of me sharing that information, I'm thinking also about interpersonal violence settings, right? Folks who are fleeing domestic violence will go to a very private shelter where it is expected that nobody knows where they are except the people that they agree to share that info with, right? And of course, there are safety implications there, right? That person is fleeing violence. And if it gets out where they're staying, they may face even worse consequences, right? Even worse violence up to and including death. It also protects us as a practitioner when we respect people's right to privacy and confidentiality. And I'm especially thinking of folks who live in very small, tight knit communities, right? Um, it may be that you see your clients at the grocery store, down at the corner store. It may be that you see them at the farmer's market or shoe shopping, right? And so keeping that private information confidential is going to protect you in that possibility of dual relationship. It is a check where you get to make a separation between, nope, now I'm being in the community and now I'm doing this work, right? It's that separation, and a clearer delineation there allows us to operate more carefully in both aspects of our lives. So thinking a little bit more about what information is protected. Of course, we're maybe familiar with HIPAA. It's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It's been around for a long time. This is the federal law that protects people's information, right? And so HIPAA names like 18, maybe more by now, distinct informational elements that are considered identifiers. This is private health information, or PHI as it's called. So it's things like your name, a person's name, their address, all elements of dates related to that individual, right? Their birth date, their admission date to the program, their discharge date, their exact age, right? All of these things are protected information related to dates, their phone number. If they have an email address, that is protected health information. Of course, their social security number, their benefit numbers. If they have a driver's license, their driver's license number is protected health information. What else? Even if they have a car, and not many of the folks that I've served have cars, but sometimes they do. Their VIN number on their car is protected health information, right? It's like anything related to this person is protected by federal law. Their fingerprints, their voice print, any photographic images of them. This comes up a lot, or it did come up a lot in the last agency that I worked at, where we would get referrals from city outreach workers. And sometimes before getting all the proper releases of information, those outreach workers are really wanting to make sure people get into housing, right? And so they're texting us photos of this person. You'll find them under the bridge on Fairmont Avenue, and they look like this. Well, they've just broken HIPAA, right? Even though we know that's for a good cause, we're going to be able to find that person out on the streets and get them into housing more easily. They have broken HIPAA by sharing that photograph of that person. Let's see what else I want to share here. Yep, their images. There are also some other special instances, other protected information or additionally protected information. I know that you're living in Kentucky, or most folks are in Kentucky, but in some states, and PA is one of them, there are additional measures like the Confidentiality of HIV-Related Information Act here in Pennsylvania, right? And so that prohibits care providers and social service providers from disclosing any HIV-related info without the express permission of that person, except in really special limited instances, right? So often we've had people on our caseloads who we've done kind of group consultation around, psychiatrists, doctors, nurses, social workers. And in those contexts, we have even had to protect that information, even though we all work in the same agency, right? We say, well, this person has some special health conditions or some special health needs. Well, that's really all we can say, right? Because of that extra layer of protection around that info. There are laws about mental health conditions, people experiencing domestic violence, and people experiencing human trafficking, sort of a number of additional protections placed. All of that stuff is PHI anyway, but there are special protections made for these protected classes and things that people are experiencing. Any questions there? I know that HIPAA is pretty basic, and I know I covered that very quickly, but I just want to see if there are questions that are coming up for folks. Oh, I see Khalil says this might change some of the answers for the HIV example. Yeah. And I think nobody said that they would disclose that information, but just adds a little extra layer of protection there. Yep.
Yeah, it might inform that. I think I've seen this also in the Housing First Agency that Ryan worked at, that I worked at, that we worked at, in needing to be careful in like how we grouped clients. We knew who our participants who had HIV were. We knew who they were. They needed like additional care or like special care, other medical things. But we couldn't just have a list of all our HIV folks somewhere, right? If we did, it needed to be called something very different. So yeah, some special protections for HIV and AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
Am I jumping the gun? Did we already talk about like special protections for like sexual assault stuff and human trafficking, or no?
No, it's listed in some of our notes. Did you want to add that stuff?
Gotcha. Yeah, just as this is relevant in the housing space specifically, even beyond like the nonprofit space and our like helping agencies, right? If a landlord or a property management company is made aware of some sort of like human trafficking, sexual abuse, anything like in that sort of space, there's some special protections and ways that they have to navigate how they share information amongst one another, even if they're just like a property management company, right? So that's not us, that's not a nonprofit, but people who are being asked to abide by some similar rules and protections for a special group of folks.
Mm-hmm. I think, is that VAWA?
I think partially, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the Violence Against Women Act. And yeah, I guess there are more. All right. Another kind of component of confidentiality that we don't think of, if somebody asks you, are you allowed to share somebody's status in the program or share information with other providers? I think most people are very clear. No, I can't do that without a release. But another sort of vector where we end up breaking people's confidentiality is in our workspaces. And so if you work in a space where you have a shared office space and clients come to see you for case management meetings or other support, one common way that we break people's confidentiality is by keeping lists of people, or even like phone directories of our clients, or maybe the list of people that we're going to cover in our next case consultation. Or maybe I was helping somebody fill out a piece of paperwork and I left it on the desk there and my next client came in, right? So these are all vectors where we're breaking confidentiality when we're not being cautious about our overall workspace, right? So thinking about paperwork, making sure that we're never leaving paperwork out on our desk after we wrap up with one person before we move on to the next one. We've had the experience of ready to move on to the next client. So I flip over the paperwork And then while I'm doing other stuff, typing on the computer, client peeps under the paper, right? People are curious, and I haven't done a good enough job of protecting that information. So sliding it into the desk, getting it totally out of the workspace as an additional measure may be something to consider. Thinking about bulletin boards. And this one is tricky because some agencies like to do a really nice job of recognizing their participants, right? Birthdays in the month of May, right? Maybe we have a bulletin board with names of birthdays for the month of May. I think that could be considered a confidentiality violation, right? Even though it's like such a nice thing to do. So taking that extra step maybe of seeking some consent around that instead of just recognizing people, right? Instead of doing it as a surprise, saying, hey, we want to do a birthday board. Do we have your permission to display your name on the birthday board and your birth date? The other thing I want to kind of suggest, and this is not covered by HIPAA, but for us to take some consideration about what personal information we display about ourselves. Do I want to place photos of my family members on my desk or behind my desk? Do I have a bumper sticker that indicates the school that my child attends? Do I want to, have my NA keychain on my keys that I bring to work, right? Maybe we do. Maybe the answer is yes to all of those questions. What I'm suggesting here is that we take a little extra time to think about what messages we're sending when we display those things, right? If I'm a very religious person and I hang a cross behind my desk, that sends a very specific message, right? And so I want to be clear that this is the message I intend to send, and here's how I'll explain it. Sunshine, were you raising your hand? Did you want to add something? Oh, you're still me. There you go.
Sorry, I was trying to click the unthing. So we have a dilemma at the shelter right now. We have one or two clients that are Googling us,
Oh, wow.
all of the staff that work it up. And so they know work history from, what's that website?
LinkedIn, maybe?
LinkedIn, there you go.
Yep.
So some of our they're Googling their records, like jail records, like it's a whole thing right now. And they're going and telling other clients, like, look at who they have hired here. One of our homeless clients, yeah, it's just a whole deal. It's rough. So
Yeah, sounds like it's causing problems too, like
it
raising
is,
a
it
bit
is.
of a
There's a lot of
ruckus in the
trust
shelter.
issues. Yeah, a lot of trust issues now, thinking that our people are CPS and taking children away, and it's rough right now. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, and I think we're going to get into this even a little bit more when we get into our boundaries section, but the way we present ourselves online is fair game to the world, right? Like that is out there. When we put something about ourselves out there, it's out there. And I think if we think that our clients won't find it, it's just for the people that I want to see it, that's naive, right? We're living in 2025 and everybody's got a smartphone, even the folks that have been living outside for 10 years, right? They're charging it in train stations and looking you up on LinkedIn in between sub rides, right? So
Yeah.
managing how we put ourselves out there on the internet is part of doing the work of homeless services these days, actually, as kind of strange as that sounds. So thanks for bringing that up, Sunshine.
I've got to leave. I'm gonna miss you all, but if you're able to send some of this through email.
Will do.
All right, thank
Will do.
you.
All right, take care.
Bye.
The other thing I want to say about workspaces is if your work is happening in a kind of a mobile way, and most of the supportive housing case managers that I know are, rather than, except people who work in shelter, but folks who work in like rapid rehousing programs, permanent supportive housing programs, you're on the move quite a bit. You're visiting people in their homes, right? And so another kind of vector of workplace confidentiality leaking are going to be the documents that we have with us in the field, right? Pulling out a binder or a chart or something like that out in the field or in your car when you're at the gas station, you're kind of looking things over. All of that are potential confidentiality violations. And so considering Even many folks are expected to do like in the moment documentation. But if that doesn't occur, they'll go to their car and type their notes up really quick on the laptop, right? There's potential to leak some of that information just by people walking by your car. I don't know, you're talking on the phone, people can hear you. So a lot of different ways that we need to be careful about. Relatedly, thinking about being mindful about who we're discussing and what we're discussing, who might be around us. And I want to be a little strict here and say this also applies to the people in our own agency, right? The director of communications who like does the social posts for our agency, they probably don't need to know the health status of the folks that we're working with, right? Or the harm reduction intervention I'm using with them, right? They're not related to that case. So even though kind of in a technical sense, they are a bit privy to some of the information, not really. That consent form, that release of information that a person signed is really related to the care that we provide them, not to just anybody in the agency. So while we're having our discussions, while we're in the hallway, while we're at the water cooler, are water coolers still a thing? Or am I dating myself? In the kitchen, I guess, right? There are like so many conversations that I had in like the staff kitchen where it's like, you can't be talking about this right here, right? Like, I know you're heating up your casserole or whatever, but go back to the office to like talk about this client. That's another space where this happens quite a bit. So not discussing personal details of people's housing, their meds, their behavioral health, while another client or while an uninvolved staff member is there. The last agency we worked at worked in teams, right? So it would be a team of like 8 to 10 providers serving a group of people. The other team didn't need to know about our clients, not usually. Sometimes, but it was like very special instances, right? Sometimes we think that if we just like omit names, it's enough. Oh, did you see that KM was really acting up with their landlord today? Well, our clients know. They know each other's initials. They know each other's like code words. It's not actually that secret when we just like omit somebody's name because they're very smart. They're very observant. They're kind of listening for details. And you've just like violated someone's confidentiality that way if we're not careful.
If I could jump in here real quick,
Yeah.
I went to a school, and I'm sure it wasn't specific to my school, but I went to a boarding school in like middle school and high school, and the way that in high school when they would show us like our grades, we didn't have a portal. We had like a one big giant screen that everyone would look at the same time, and we would have to find our number. And I still remember being like so scared and so like, wow, what if somebody knows my number and knows that I like have a D in this class and I'm not passing, right? I think about that in this example too.
Did you consider just like doing better in that class actually?
I'm an Ivy League girl. Don't.
Okay,
Or
fair. Yeah, so like using people's client identifiers in the agency, kind of similar to Kalo's example. People know what each other is. Your number 19082. Okay, I see. So yeah, being extra careful there. Maybe this is relevant for you. These days, phones are such a critical part of our case management practice and our peer support practice. We're always talking with clients. We're kind of collaborating with our team members. And it's a space that offers an opportunity to violate people's confidentiality and their privacy. And so I want to suggest that if you do get a call, either from a client or related to a client, try and excuse yourself when you're around folks who are not on your team. I know it feels extra, but so many times I've been sitting in rooms or waiting rooms or sitting for jury duty, wherever you are, and just hearing people on their phones, and you can hear both sides of that conversation. You can hear everything that they're saying, little bits from over the phone, and you're getting the whole story, right? And so I want to sort of suggest that we excuse ourselves from those spaces, go to a bathroom or go somewhere else if you can, to kind of have that outside. Staying aware of what we say in a public space. If I do take that phone call outside, or if I'm on public transit, or if I'm out to lunch, making sure I'm kind of looking around, being mindful of who's around, and taking extra precautions there. There's a note here that says people are nosy, so be thoughtful of your environment. this is about me, actually. This note is about me. If you and I ever go out to dinner, the likelihood that I also know what the conversations are at that table and that table, I'm listening all the time. I'm so curious. If somebody is in a fight with their partner at a restaurant, I know everything that's happening in their life because I'm very nosy. And so if I'm doing it, I think other people are too. So it's sort of just managing information carefully. Speakerphone. Raise your Zoom hand if you're a person that uses the speakerphone regularly. Do you use speakerphone just in your regular day-to-day practice? I know Kalo does. Kalo was yelling at me because I was not using my speakerphone one time. And he was like, you like use the phone on your ear? Do you remember this, Kalo? You were like, you weren't yelling at me. You were just surprised that I used the phone in an old school way. I want to say for folks that use speakerphone, really only do that when you're alone, when it's work related, right? It's too easy for folks to overhear on speaker what's happening and to violate people's confidentiality. Being aware of what we send in group text is another kind of space, especially when we're texting with our team members about clients. Making sure we're not putting protected info in text. If we have to relay some info about a client, try and keep it as brief and as like divulge as little as possible. Have that phone call, right? Hey, let's have a phone call so we can talk about this person. And yeah, stick to the essentials. Of course, we know that there are some limits to confidentiality. We are all mandated reporters. And so what that means is that if we come across any child abuse or elder abuse or dependent care abuse, we are obligated to report that, right? We can't just hear about it and do nothing about it. And so in that case, we are in fact violating somebody's confidentiality, right? We're sharing usually over a hotline or sometimes there are portals in Philadelphia. You can do both info about that abuse that's happening. We're violating somebody's confidentiality. And so there are limits to confidentiality when it is not only acceptable, but necessary to violate this, right? And of course, the reason why we would do that is to prevent serious or foreseeable or imminent harm to somebody that we can identify. Another case, another limit to confidentiality is the duty to warn. So when we're in a helping relationship and somebody expresses to us that, a serious threat of physical violence against somebody else who's not a client, we have a duty to warn that person, actually, even though they're not our client, right? And so if Khalil comes up to me and says, I'm thinking about hurting, I don't know, my old teacher from back in school, I have a duty to warn that teacher, even though I'm not connected to them at all, right? And in fact, if I don't do that, I am liable for any violence that could potentially happen. And so, what duty to warn looks like is making every effort that we can to connect with the identifiable person and also calling law enforcement. When we do that, if violence then does occur against that potential victim, we're not liable. Of course, that's not good anyway, right? We don't want that to happen. We're doing other things to support this person and find ways to make sure that we're avoiding this violence. But also, we're not going to be the ones that are accountable and held liable because we've done our job in warning that person. Another limit to confidentiality would be court orders, right? And so courts can order our records to be audited. Insurance companies can audit our records, right? They're the ones who are paying for the services. And so they have a right to some of these records. These are usually consent forms that we get in the beginning of care anyway. It's sort of built into the process. One that we sometimes like to talk about is the Patriot Act of 2001, which has so much in it. But the reason we like to talk about it here is if somebody is under investigation by the FBI, they can ask to see whatever. And I'm not allowed to tell that person that they're being investigated, right? So there's almost like a gag against us to say, hey, the FBI is investigating you. You might want to do X, Y, and Z to protect yourself. We're not allowed to do that. And that's very specific to this Patriot Act. And of course, we have this concept of do no harm, which is that if a person is going to be a harm to themselves or others, we're often in a position where we end up having to involuntarily hospitalize folks, right? And so the kind of ethical principles around that are the do no harm, and will violate somebody's confidentiality in order to protect them. Yeah. Last thing I'll say is, who needs to know when it's time to violate somebody's confidentiality or not violate, when it's time to kind of share info about a person. Even within your team, we're treating any information about them as a need to know basis. If you don't need to know this information, I don't need to share it. We know we can't protect something once it's out there. So think before you share that info. And then if you're not sure, consider the info protected and ask your supervisor, right? It's always best practice to say, I can't share that info. Let me talk to my supervisor. I'll get back to you. Lastly, this is not protected by any laws, but I want to suggest that you'd be a good coworker if you also protected your coworker's confidentiality, right? They have a right to privacy as well. If they share something with you on a personal level, we don't want to go around the agency telling clients or other staff members about that, right? If they have work-related changes, promotions, demotions, job losses, any other kind of non-work life details, we're making sure that we keep that private because we have each other's backs and we would want them to do the same for us, right? So again, that's not protected by law, just good practice. Any questions here about confidentiality and privacy, this section that we've talked about? Anything sound off to you, different than what you've learned in the past? Any questions? Cool. All right. We want you to feel free to stop us at any time if you do have questions. I think there might be a good chance to take a really quick break, stretch your legs, get some water. Let's take 5 minutes and we'll jump back into boundaries, which is a pretty big topic. So I'll see you at 1:48.
Awesome. So welcome back, folks. If you're not, but can hear me, hopefully you make your way back soon. But we're going to move into the boundaries portion of this afternoon's training. And I'm sorry. I clicked the arrow, which it doesn't typically advance slides, but I think me and Ryan just did that at the same time. And I was like, whoa. So we are, of course, going to talk about why boundaries are important. And we're not going to talk about each of these questions in depth, but I do think that this set of questions are a really great setup for just some general reflection around boundaries, where you sit with boundaries. Of course, we're going to talk about definitions and things like that, but I think some of the other reflective questions are like, what are poor boundaries, right? I think maybe I'm interested in feedback around poor boundaries specifically. What comes to mind for folks when you hear that question? What are poor boundaries? You can feel free to jump in and let us know or fire off in the chat. If it's hard to think of an example of a poor boundary, maybe that next bullet point that says what types of problems arise from poor boundaries or lack of boundaries.
I mean, respecting boundaries for time. I mean, I have big issue with that, especially with our clients and with the environment that I'm working in.
Okay. So that sounds like, well, can you tell me more about that? Is that like a boundary that you are breaking or violating or crossing on your end, or who's doing that? Who's in like violation of your time boundaries, John?
Well, it takes two to tango, but I mean, we have a really odd situation. We have a 24 unit permanent supportive housing apartment complex, and our shared office is an open former apartment in the basement. And so our clients have access to us by knocking on the door. And when they walk in, they're looking at everybody's desk. And so I mean, I've been working really, I've been there about a year and I'm just now getting to the point where I'm working really hard to get clients to set appointments and keep appointments and not be available now that we have a caseload of 50 clients, you know, being able to knock at the door and get immediate attention is no longer sustainable.
Sure. So it sounds like for some very like practical sort of like barriers there in like physical setup, in like work structure and how the roles are set up that kind of pave the way for some like boundary messiness along the way. Um, Thanks for sharing that because I do think a lot of times when we hear boundaries, it's kind of a buzzword almost. It's like, oh my gosh, you need to set more boundaries or better boundaries. You need to be better about this thing. Well, sometimes it's really probably not in our control. I think especially in your example, it sounds like there are um some things about that just are the way they are given like your agency structure and how that's designed or how the program is designed. Um, People doing what they can with what they've got when it comes to space in the helping profession is like not a new thing, right? I think about all of the like mobile services that we have, which is another great kind of area to be talking about like confidentiality and things like that when we're offering services in the street to folks too. What's that look like? Um, but yeah, I thank you. I wasn't expecting like a specific boundary, so that was actually really helpful. That's why I moved on to the next bullet point. But so to hear you say like actually a time boundary was actually pretty helpful. Are there any other problems that folks think arise from poor boundaries or a lack of boundaries? While folks are maybe thinking, oh sorry, go ahead, Laura. Were you about
I
to?
was saying it's easy to get burnt out from your job if you don't have good boundaries or you don't have support from your agency to help you set boundaries. You get burnt out really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think what I hear there is like, boundaries keep us safe. They might even keep us able to maintain and sustain the energy and workflow that is healthy and keeps us providing good care for the folks that we work with and want to be supporting. Um, Thanks for that, Laura. There's a little bit of a distinction here in the language, poor boundaries or a lack of boundaries. And this distinction only came within the past couple days of Ryan and I talking about this. But on my end, that comes from the idea of people that have maybe really rigid boundaries in their personal lives, right? When you work in the harm reduction or housing first space or the housing setting or substance use space, um, our personal boundaries kind of don't exist. Not that they don't exist. You should have your own personal individual boundaries. But when it comes to like your own, if those are formed by your morals and values, that might change when you are your professional self or providing services or care to someone, right? You might be more patient or more empathetic with somebody in the workplace, right? In the professional space than you are maybe in your personal life. And to be somebody who is like, I need to not talk more. Let's just say a boundary is I'm not going to talk more than 5 minutes after I've made a decision if somebody wants to challenge or argue a decision, right? Maybe in your personal life, that's fine. And maybe that serves you. At work or with participants, that might actually be harmful, right? To not be engaging in like healthy dialogue or healthy conflict with the folks that you work with or alongside. So, I just offer that here as like a gentle challenge. Um, a lot of times when we're talking about boundaries, I think we're actually talking and encouraging folks to maybe be more rigid. But I want to recommend like the reframe of being more like protective over like your time, your space, your energy, maybe even your clients. Um, I appreciate that distinction. Um, there's some notes here I want to share with folks, but one of the reasons that we have boundaries in place, we named the word protection already, like they are protective. Um, but it also limits our exposure to stress. Um, and we have some like very like scientific notes here about like increasing cortisol and adrenaline in our bodies, right? When our boundaries are crossed, or if we don't have any boundaries at all, we are generally going to be more stressed, which we know makes us sick in our brains, in our bodies. It makes work a little more difficult. So what's most important here is probably to know that we put boundaries in place to protect our own mental well-being. All right, Ryan, we're ready for the next slide. So this is a general definition that we appreciate of just boundaries. It's a very textbooky definition. It doesn't come from a textbook, though. It comes from some social work literature, I would assume. But this says that these are the rules that govern how we interact in our relationships with others, indicating what we find to be acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. Now, what I think is important to know about this is a general boundaries definition, right? Not necessarily professional boundaries. So I want to offer an additional definition that we might have in mind that we might keep in mind when we're talking about boundaries in the workspace specifically. I feel weird about the word professionalism sometimes, but when I say that, I'm mostly talking about what do our boundaries look like at work. So when we're talking about professional boundaries, we're maybe talking about the limits to the relationship of a member or staff and a person in their care, which allow for a safe and therapeutic connection between the staff. If you've ever maybe been in another training with Ryan and I, you might have heard us talk about or use the term the therapeutic alliance. That connection and that relationship is what we hope to maintain in maintaining our professional boundaries with or our workplace boundaries with the folks that we serve and work with in our settings. So I think the two distinctions here, and this is likely just a matter of semantics, but when I say them out loud, they actually do feel different. So when we're talking about just like boundaries overall, umbrella boundaries, we're talking about rules. But when we talk about professional boundaries, we're talking about the limits, right? We've already said limits to confidentiality, limits to maybe self-disclosure, which we'll talk about later in the training as well. Limits to the way you might engage with a client or participant that you really care about, but it's going to look different because they're not actually your family member or a friend that you've met in the community. They're somebody that you're serving in the work setting. So that's another distinction here that I think is important to keep in mind. The idea of professional boundaries versus our personal boundaries can and probably should be a little different. This is also, we're going to talk about boundary crossings, which was a new thing for us to be digging into and exploring the idea of what it looks like to cross a boundary. I'm going to give you another term to just keep in the back of your brains because that's coming next. But we're going to make a distinction between boundary crossings and boundary violations, right? So a boundary crossing is going to be maybe a little more subtle, typically pretty harmless, but does have the potential to maybe be more serious. And I think that the examples here in the next bullet point are great examples of like, this could mean a lot to somebody or it could mean nothing at all, right? And it is weird to say out loud that sometimes boundary crossings can be therapeutically purposeful or intentional. We might do this on purpose. Self-disclosure is one of those things. We have a whole couple slides about self-disclosure, so I won't spend too long there, but there might be some really valid reasons that folks are self-disclosing things about their lives or about their families or lived experiences to clients and participants. Some people get paid to do that specifically, right? That might be your title. But then also physical touch. Ryan and I are always telling folks, best practice, maybe we just avoid it altogether, right? But there are times and there are moments and there are relationships where that physical touch might mean a lot to somebody in a way that's not harmful. But we don't always know if it's going to be harmful or not, right? Or what that means to somebody else. So that's why I think we are on the side of don't do that. But it's not necessarily bad or like an egregious violation, right? this isn't somebody communicating to you, I don't like my arm touched, don't touch my arm, right? This is you seeing somebody feeling a big way and having a big emotion and your hand on their arm, right? Not necessarily a fireable offense, but something that we should hold with some significance and be thinking about what that might mean to a client or a participant. I'm trying to think. I'm a therapist in the private practice space, and my clients, and I really appreciate this, but they invite me to things sometimes. Some things make sense. Oh, I'm doing a show, or oh, I'm going to this like art thing. I'm presenting at this. They might invite me somewhere. One time, I told a client I was moving, and she said, "Oh my God, do you need help?" And I'm like, I mean, of course I need help, who doesn't need help moving? But I'm not sure that makes sense for us to be doing, right? For my client to be in my old home and moving me into my new home might be an example of, I actually think that's probably a boundary violation. But what's important to be thinking about there on my end would be, what does this mean to this client, right? To be helping me in this way? What does this mean about my presence in her life? What does this mean if our relationship needs to end abruptly because of things like insurance and the government or whatever that looks like, right? What does this mean or represent to this client? And I might know some things about her past relationships or like relational experiences with other people, relational trauma, and this could really be a big deal if this goes well or doesn't go well. I don't know about you all, but if moving goes 100% okay, it's still very stressful. I would hate to have a client along for the ride. If you've ever been a part of a move for a client, those have also been very stressful, right? In the housing first space, that's something that we do a lot. I think one of like the really beautiful parts of the job is moving somebody into their home for the first time, but also just so stressful because it's moving. All right, Ryan, we're ready for the next slide. We are going to move on to boundary violations. So these are the non-therapeutic crossings that are, we might label them unprofessional. And they are probably more likely to cause harm. So this might look like touching that involves a little more than just like a hand on somebody's arm, right? We shouldn't be like caressing our participants or like rubbing their backs or like our hands in their hair. True story. We've seen that before, right? And something like that did end up in somebody getting fired, right? But these are the things that happen in relationships. These things come up just like they do in your personal lives. Boundary violations come up in our professional lives as well. They're typically fueled by a self-centered purpose that's often done in secrecy or with ulterior motives. So a client wanting to dig up or know information about you might prompt them to ask really personal questions, which could be a boundary violation. Some of those questions, I'm trying to think of really personal questions that would represent like a boundary violation. But I think what's more important than the example is just also knowing that we can do that too, right? And if we're not addressing where that's coming from, we're going to talk a little bit later about transference and counter transference and like managing that and how that manifests in these spaces. But clients cross boundaries, helping professionals cross boundaries as well, I think is what I'm trying to say here. And I'm going to keep it concise because my words are getting all jumbled in this bullet point specifically. But these are also going to be clearly exploitive or harmful. So whether that's physical, psychological, or financial. I'm thinking of an example in the housing space, and this has changed, but in the housing space, even in the housing first space, as like wonderful and beautiful as we want it to be, there are agencies that have previously locked folks out of their homes, right? After housing them through like a housing first model because maybe they're not getting like home visits or they didn't sign some sort of like documentation. And we think this is going to be the thing that does it, right? But if you look at this last bullet point, that is something that might be clearly harmful to somebody, right? Making somebody sleep outside when they do have access to a home might be something that is very obviously harmful and could be a boundary violation in our workplace. I'm having a really hard time thinking of additional boundary violations for some reason. So I think that's a great time to get some engagement from you all here. Given the information around what a boundary violation is here on the screen, I'm curious if anybody has any examples of what this has looked like, maybe not in your current agencies, but in other agencies that you've worked at in the past, maybe your current agency, if you're open and willing to share that. Um, or where do you see this happening most often? Ooh, Ryan put one in the chat. Clients looking through my paperwork. You know what? I wouldn't put it past me if I had a really stressed out case manager who was really flustered and I knew that what I needed was on their desk. I'd probably look at their desk and look for my paper and look for my own documentation. Yeah, that is certainly a boundary violation.
Yeah, I'm curious what other boundary violations are coming up for people. It was the most selected ethical problem when we did that poll earlier, and so I'm curious. And boundaries was the one that popped up the most. So what sort of boundary issues? We did hear the one from Sunshine around people like searching them up and then like sharing that info with other people. What else?
Yeah, Ryan also put a good example in the chat here that says, I tend to cross boundaries with resources for people. I'll give extra bus passes, extra time, etc., as a way to rebel against systems that I think don't go far enough to support people. That sounds like a very Ryan thing to say, but also is an example, a very real life example of maybe a boundary crossing, right? This is not harmful to somebody. This is actually helpful. I might even call that harm reduction. To give somebody an additional bus pass, they can go to the medical appointment, they can go see their family, right? Whatever they're going to do with that bus pass, they're commuting. Yeah, I think that is a really easy example. Not easy, a really accessible example. Because I'm sure we all have examples of that where we spent extra time with somebody or we've given an additional resource or something after a client maybe has exhausted some of their resources, given like maybe like written policy by an agency. Yeah. I didn't ask explicitly for boundary crossings, but if that's easier for you to think about as well, or maybe we have new language for this now, you're like, actually, these are boundary crossings and not violations. We would love to hear that as well.
Yeah, I think I'm struck right now, Khalil, as we're like talking about this, and I want you folks to kind of like chime in here. We want to sit here for a moment and kind of like understand the boundary stuff that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. I'm struck that like so many people in the helping services, if you talk to them about what's going on in their work, they say, "Oh, people crossing boundaries all the time," or "You got to set good boundaries. That's how you like take care of yourself." And so I'm wondering what that looks like. That's kind of what we're asking here is like, what does that look like in practice? What does that look like in concrete terms? If you have ever been a person that said, you got to have good boundaries, where are you finding boundary crossings and violations in your work currently?
I'd like to hear from some of our Salvation Army folks. Bobby, Darlene, is Mumo still on here? You all have been kind of quiet today. I'd like to hear from you all. Emma, some of you who haven't spoken yet. You're usually pretty talkative when we are in person.
Yes, I am, but I'm just listening today. It's good to listen sometimes and learn some more stuff.
You always have good things to say, Dee Dee.
Today I'm listening.
Well, while Salvation Army folks are maybe thinking, I think a lot about the idea of physical space, where our agencies say clients can or can't be as a boundary violation, or maybe a boundary crossing, because it might not be totally harmful, but there might be information that participants shouldn't have access to because it deals with other participants, or it just might not be a common space meant for folks to be like lounging in. I think I've seen that a ton throughout my social work career so far. It's just here's where clients can be, here's where they can't be, right? Whether that's a waiting room, whether that is like at Pathways with Ryan and I, we had team rooms, right? Typically, uh, it was encouraged to not have more than one participant in a team room at a time, which was so hard because we wanted to have this like open structure and open flow. But when you have that, more than one person is going to show up oftentimes, and things are going to overlap and change, and you're always going to have the one person who's like only one person in the room at a time, right? Um, and then having to like sit folks somewhere else, but then that's not a sitting area, right? I think a lot about physical space here. I think that's what comes up for me mostly. I think I maybe even heard some of that in John's example earlier around time boundaries, some physical space stuff.
I think something that I have been experiencing is occasionally I will drive clients to their appointments and whatnot, and then they will want me to drive them like to church or to a
Mhm.
family's house or something that isn't what we're working on. Or they will expect me to be available for like last minute appointments that I wasn't, made aware of. So that's something that I've been experiencing.
Thanks for sharing that, Mercedes. And I don't want to assume, but I have a feeling there might have been times where you've been like, yeah, we can do that. And other times where you've been like, actually, no, we can't do that. And I'm curious about like what has informed those decisions for you to do or to not do when those things come up.
Usually, well, for me, when I will say yes last minute, it's something like getting their medication or
Mm.
something we've been trying to do for like weeks or months that I'm like, okay, let's just go since you're here now because we really need this to move forward with housing or health insurance or whatever it is. Um, so it just depends on the person, honestly. And if they struggle showing up for appointments, then I might just take them if they're there.
Yeah, no, I think that that sounds like a really healthy way to be making that decision. And I think that that is exactly what I was referring to or talking around and having a really hard time talking about actually when we're talking about rigidity, right? It might not be super helpful to say we're never going to do anything else other than what we set out to do, right? Because if they're going to go to the medical appointment they've been dodging or avoiding because you had something else to do that day, it sounds like that might be like a treatment goal or toward health and wellness for that participant, right? Which might be when we're like, okay, this is annoying. This is a boundary crossing, maybe not a boundary violation. It's an inconvenience, but this person might be getting the care that they need. I think that's the perfect example of when rigidity is sometimes kind of harmful.
I'm thinking about an
Maybe not.
article. Oh, sorry. Oh, well.
I think I just feel better about the word like limiting, right? Sometimes being like really rigid in boundaries I think can be limiting. And I want to make boundaries are not policies. I'm not saying go break every policy written by your agency, right? But when things are gray, and they often are when our jobs are to just really do life with people navigating the housing space, right? It's kind of like anything goes. The things that we've done with participants in our lives, I've never thought that that would be what came after a social work education, right? But it is, and we are doing life with people, and that looks like a lot of things, a lot of different things. Yeah, I appreciate that example, Mercedes. Go for it, Ryan.
I was just wondering if I could ask you a question, Mercedes. When folks ask you, "Hey, can you take me also to like church after this appointment or whatever?" Do you have a hard time saying no, or does it feel pretty easy? Because you do a little bit of assessment, is what you shared with us. You're like, this thing that we've really been needing to do, or like this goal, and I got you here now. So you're kind of doing a little bit of snap assessment, like, but I'm curious to know whether it's hard to say no in that case.
Not usually. Um, but like I said, like if I know that they really are looking forward to seeing their son and this will help them go to the appointment and also help with like their mental health, then I will do it. But if it's just like I could give you a TARC pass and you can go, then it like I said, it just really depends. But I feel like all of the people I've had for a long time or a little bit, so I know them pretty well. So Yeah.
So you kind of understand their life circumstance and you're kind of
Mhm.
making judgments along the way about how well this is going to help them meet their
Yeah.
goals. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I wanted to add here that I read an article recently about communication styles, and there are folks who are always willing to ask for the things that they need. And there are folks who are like so afraid and will never ask for what they need, right? Unless they like absolutely must have it, like super, super serious. And so for the folks that are more tentative to ask for what they need, when people ask them for stuff, it feels overwhelming because it's like, oh, I have to do, it's hard to say no to that because it's like, well, I wouldn't ask for this unless I really need it. So you must really need it. Therefore, I have to say yes. Whereas the people on the other side of that communication coin, there are many people who sort of feel like, well, you're never going to get what you don't ask for. And so they expect to hear no's and they're okay with hearing a no, right? And so there's this conflict between, where we're just sort of like moving past each other because I don't want to say no, I don't want to hurt your feelings or something like that, and they're saying, well, say no if you don't want to do it, right? And so we kind of talk past each other with boundaries like that. I see John's comment in the chat. Wait, what? We can say no? Yeah, and I think coming from that perspective of like the rigid boundaries side of things, um, I've seen so many people that just say no to everything. Nope, agency policy says, right? And those
Yeah.
folks are not as effective actually in helping people work towards their goals. And so while we're having this conversation about have good boundaries, I think, yeah, part of kind of to tag on something that Khalil said is like, but also like, can we have flexible boundaries, right? There is like a mix there.
Yeah. And I don't think flexible boundaries aren't good boundaries, right? Because I think if you are, some people work very hard to overcome their like people pleasing tendencies, right? I've met many people who say, I'm a recovering people pleaser, which is annoying. I hate when people say that, but it is a thing, right? Like it feels good to be liked and it's something that we want to be doing in our lives. But if we swing the complete opposite direction and are giving our participants no's every time, guess what? They're not going to reach out to us for support that we might actually be able to offer them. So when we talk about good boundaries, it doesn't mean that you are the greatest and the best at saying no, but I think in making a good and healthy, intentional and informed decision to do or not to do with or for or alongside a participant. Alrighty. I want you to forget about your participants now, right? And only think about your coworkers, your colleagues, your admin folks, your supervisors, if I didn't say that already, your leadership teams and that sort of space, right? We want to talk about workplace boundaries. What does it look like? What do your boundaries look like between you and your place of work? So these are also just some additional reflection questions. The first says, how much time is spent devoted to work? The way that many of our systems are structured right now is many of us maybe work a 40-hour work week, something like 9 to 5, 8 to 4, 7 to 3, 12 to 8, that sort of thing. So there might actually be a number here, but I think that second bulleted question is really important. Are you able to spend any energy on things not related to your work? Hobbies, things you're interested in, your own social supports, family, relationships with others. Is this an equal split? Should it be an equal split? I think is another good question. I think I have an answer what I want that to look like in my own life, but I don't think that has to be the same across the board for everybody, right? This I think is like the stereotypical, like, what does your work-life balance look like, right? I once had a job where I was on call 24/7. So guess what that meant? Like my work-life balance was terrible. I'd be walking my dog, trying to like be mindful and be intentional and feel the breeze on my skin and be out of work and then get a crisis call, right? Because I'm on call 24/7 for a role that I used to have actually at Pathways with Ryan. But that's not my life anymore. Um, but I do think about examples like that. When I also think about the shelter setting, maybe Salvation Army folks are familiar with this kind of dilemma, but I've also worked in shelter settings with youth And one of the things about youth in a shelter setting is like it is just an inherently traumatic experience, right? To be experiencing homelessness as a kiddo. So what do? We fight, right? They would fight and they would fight a lot and they would fight really violently and brutally sometimes. And you know what else would happen? Sometimes I'd be the only person on the floor at this shelter, and I would just be losing my mind, like, wow, what do I do? Right? Which I don't think anyone should ever be left alone ever, right? But sometimes our workplaces are structured in that way, and we might need to set a workplace boundary or advocate for ourselves. I heard advocacy a couple times at the top of the training for our own safety and to maintain and sustain our own boundaries. Um, if we think about boundaries in our personal lives, we want to encourage and reinforce boundaries to sustain and maintain relationships. Same thing for our workplaces. If we have good or good enough boundaries with our workplaces, we are sustaining our ability to remain in this agency. We know we have a really high turnover in the helping profession in general in our agencies. Case managers specifically have a really high turnover rate, right? So if we are setting good and healthy workplace boundaries, our ability to maintain a job that feels healthy and still fulfilling to us might actually be increased by maybe becoming solid or more clear about what our workplace boundaries are.
Actually, this is Bobby from Salvation Army.
Hi, Bobby.
Hi, did you say y'all had teens there? Youth?
What was that? Can you repeat the question, Bobby? If there's an audio issue, feel free to type the question in the chat.
Okay, I said, did you say anything about y'all used to have youth in y'all shelter?
I was telling a story about when I worked at a youth shelter. Yeah, and there would be like physical fights between some of the residents, and I might have been the only one on the floor.
Oh, so it was totally a youth shelter. That's it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Not like yes. Mhm.
Okay. Oh,
Not
that's
like that. Mhm. How do we deal with workplace stress? Might be another way that we are working towards setting workplace boundaries. Are we able to completely disconnect? Do we have a role that allows us to do that? Do we need our work emails on our phones and on our personal devices if we have work devices? And then also knowing who we can reach out to for emergency support when we need it. I also want to put a plug in here for like clinical supervision or really just supervision in general for the work that we do in being able to revisit and workshop your workplace boundaries. When I was leading an ACT team at Pathways to Housing PA, this was something that we were navigating a lot in the supervision space, right? Is what are you doing to maintain your distance from participants when you're not working, right? Because everybody on the team also had like work devices, and it's so easy to just pick up your device and look at it. We are so used to that on our personal devices. So people are also doing that with their work devices, and then they're like, oh no, so-and-so needs this thing and it's an emergency, right? We did a lot of workshopping on how to not maybe treat everything as an emergency or understanding our own coming together and being solid or having a collective understanding of maybe what does need attention or what doesn't need attention in the moment, right? What can wait until you're at work and in work mode? What doesn't belong in your home? And what I mean by what doesn't belong in your home is like I think of a participant who's like fire alarm, whose fire detector would like beep because he needed a battery and he would like blow up the team's phones. Right. And my suggestion for the team was to just let them know, hey, we'll call you when we're at work tomorrow. We'll pop up tomorrow and can do a home visit when we're at work tomorrow. Right. Those kind of situation scenarios are the ones that I think we actually don't need to bring into our homes and be talking about in length. If it's an emergency, it needs 911 or a crisis line. Otherwise, it can wait until office hours. I love that, Laura. One of the things I tell my like therapy clients is that I'm not a crisis responder. Well, I do some crisis work. My relationship with them is not to be responding to crises. So what I tell them is, I'm not a crisis responder, and actually, I don't think you'd like it if I did respond to a crisis, right? That's not who I am. That's not what I do. That's not my role. Here's what we can do. And sometimes in the housing space and people who are learning to live independently, maybe for the first time ever or for the first time in a long time, sometimes it's just workshopping with folks. What is an emergency? When do I call and reach out to my team and my support? And when do I wait or hold off or follow up? All right, we'll move right along. Setting good boundaries. So these are some of the things we might do to practice or implement boundaries that feel really healthy and are maybe a little easier to execute. One of the things that we might do is examine our own motivations for going beyond the expectations of your job. Now, this is for if there are any recovering people pleasers here in the group, right? Sometimes it just feels good to hear, good job. You are a hero. You're saving the day. You're the best case manager to ever walk the earth, right? It feels really good to hear that. But are we doing that so that we hear that, or are we doing that because there are actual needs that need to be met? We see those holes where we are meeting those needs and addressing those things. Ryan said that they like a good head pat. Good job. Yeah, what are your motivations? Is this for me or is this for the participants? Do I need recognition? If your work is to fulfill, if your work with people, if your work involves people on the other end, and you're trying to like fill some stuff for you, I do recommend a therapist. But that's an important consideration here. Am I doing this for me? Or am I doing this for my participant? It's also important that we are learning to use or maybe even learn new effective communication in the settings across all of our systems. How are we communicating amongst the team? How is our team communicating with other agencies that might be part of our participants' care teams? When can folks reach out to us, and maybe when should they hold off or ask somebody else? I'm trying to think of, there's been many examples of like interagency contact, which is like so good and healthy and collaborative, right? And then sometimes folks are calling like your Housing First agency to meet all of these needs that maybe their agency should be meeting, right? I think specifically around like the idea of transportation. There are transportation services here in Philadelphia for that many of our participants have access to via their Medicaid status. And then sometimes their care providers will call and say, this person really needs a ride to this thing. We're having trouble setting up their like Logisticare ride or whatever ride system they're using. Like, can you do this for us? We probably could, right? We are probably capable of doing those things, but it might not be our role, and it might be something that the other agency can do or should be doing. So I think about that when I think about effective communication. Who should be doing this? Whose role is it to do this? Is it my agency's role? Is it my team's role? Is it my role on my team to be doing this specific thing? One of the things that we love to do at Pathways is give folks on the team specializations. So someone might have a forensic like specialization and do really great work with our folks who are incarcerated. They're able to find them, navigate all of our like governmental like websites to see if folks have been arrested, checking dockets and things like that. We also, I'm trying to think of the other, a substance use specialist on the team, which was just like a specialization for a case manager. But everyone was using substances, so it was an interesting specialization. But who is communicating with who, I think is what is the story I'm trying to share there. And then one of the other things we might do to move towards setting healthier boundaries is to recognize that going beyond your professional boundaries with clients can put your colleagues and organization in a position of harm or failure. You've probably seen this a ton in your agencies. So-and-so did this for me, or my last case manager did this for me, or the old team leader acted in this way. Why can't you do that? Or why are you treating me so unfairly? I know you did this thing for another participant is exactly what this looks like. So I think that's also just encouragement to work within our scope, do what our job requires of us. and advocate for ourselves to maybe not be doing more than that if there are things in place for that to be done or fulfilled by another person or another space, another agency. It sounds like we should probably take another break here. Is that right, Ryan?
Yeah, let's take another 5 minutes. We've been going for 2 hours now. So let's take 5 minutes, get your water, get your coffee, whatever you need. Let's come back at 2:37, and we'll jump into the next section here.
Awesome.
Thanks, folks. All right. I think we're ready to get started again. Thanks for coming on back. We appreciate it. This next section kind of represents another of the major areas where ethical conflicts come into our practice, in that it is conflicts of interest. And there are a number of different ways this can show up. The first we wanted to talk about is dual relationships. So to just quickly define what that is, it's when we are when we are engaging with someone in more than one way. For example, if a classmate in my university course also works at the grocery store where I shop, right? I'm engaging with that person through multiple roles. And the same is true with us and our clients. So it is common for us to encounter people we know from the community who are our clients. And anytime we're engaging with them through more than one relationship, that is a dual relationship. And it is true that it can be at the same time. In other words, you're my client right now, plus I'm riding the bus with you, right? But it can also be in like a serial way. So in other words, I used to volunteer at the food pantry and I served you, and now you're my client at the housing agency much later, right? So it is possible for it to be concurrent or for it to be serial. And those are both still considered dual relationships. And dual relationships are not bad in and of themselves, right? Like they just will occur. We are just people living our lives, and we're going to interact with our clients in sort of multiple ways sometimes. I'm curious, somebody use your Zoom hand or a thumbs up or drop a yes in the chat or something like that if you have in the past, I don't know, month, seen your client outside of work hours. Any client. Khalil's hand is up. Yes. Yeah, a couple of yeses. I know I have. Yep, there's Ella. Yeah, so it is relatively common to see folks out and about. Our communities are not that big. Our cities are not that big. Even in an very urban place like Philadelphia, I still see people all the time in strange places that I wouldn't expect to see people, right? It's possible that we're seeing people through our 12-step fellowships, old coworkers, family members, etc. The kind of number one thing to do is sort of keep an eye on it and don't let it just linger out there, right? When we find ourselves interacting with people in these dual ways, I think it is important to quickly sort of put our finger on that, say, hey, this is happening, and let your supervisor know, right? Because it's possible that, it's not that harmful. I served you at the soup kitchen before, and now you're in the housing agency. No big deal, right? But there is this possibility that something comes of that where maybe I'm even thinking about people who are dealing with mental health challenges, start to build you into a delusion. You're following me around, right? Or you have it out for me, and you didn't serve me correctly then, and now you're withholding housing resources from me, right? So it is possible that these things will come back up. And if we hadn't said something, then when our supervisor asks us about it, it's like, well, yeah, I knew that person from before. It can become a problem for us, right? And so the key here is just to kind of note it, document it, talk to your supervisor about it before it becomes a problem for you, right? And then, of course, follow agency policy. Some agencies will have policies around this in terms of how you should support or conversations that you should have with that person. It may be that you need to sort of say to them, Hey, when you're working that job that I saw you at the other day, I'm probably not going to say hi to you. I don't want to out you as a client in our program, and there's no other reason why I would be talking with you that way. So I won't say hi to you unless you say hi to me, right? So we can sort of have these proactive conversations when we're noting that dual relationship component. Other types of other ways that dual relationships will show up, the types of them can be in an intimate sense. So it is possible to have a client, and this would be a huge violation of boundaries, but engage in some kind of intimate relationship, romantic or sexual or otherwise, right? In some cases, that is in fact illegal, but certainly you would lose licensure if you're a licensed professional, and you're I would be very surprised if you didn't also lose your job doing that. So it is quite exploitative in the sense that there is this power differential between you and a client, right? You are operating in a position of power as a service provider. And so the way that consent operates when those power dynamics are that way makes this really an off the table kind of conversation. But that is a type of dual relationship that has been engaged in, certainly in the past. Another way that dual relationships can look are through emotional support, right? And so again, we're not talking about roles here, right? I keep giving the example of the person that works at the grocery store but is also our client. But in a different sense, let's say I know this client really well. We've been working for 10 years together, or however long you've been at an agency, and then you go and tell them about something that's rough happening in your life, right? Like, oh, your mom has been ill and you're her caregiver now. And I'm telling my client all these details about my life. The reason I'm doing that is to receive emotional support, right? And so I'm putting them in this dual relationship position that is unfair to them, right? That's not the kind of relationship that we have with that person. And so while I'm providing service case management to them, I'm also receiving emotional support. That's a dual relationship, and it's a harmful one. Laura says, oh, wait, I saw there's a couple comments here. John says, I saw a client in the grocery store last week. Also, since before this position, my 12-step home group is across the street from our Housing First complex. So far, no one has dropped in. I bet they will, John. I bet before long they will. I'm kind of surprised it's been a year and that hasn't happened yet. No, you're like, please don't. Please don't. And then Laura says, a former client was recently hospitalized. She had Laura listed as her emergency contact. Wow. And I bet it's probably been some time since you were serving that person, right? Folks, like, our information is out there and they don't have anywhere to turn sometimes. It's like, I had a case manager back in 1975. I don't know, call them. So yeah, these dual relationships, the possibilities are all over the place. Altruistic kind of dual relationship where I work alongside an outreach worker who does street outreach, who cares so much about people living on the streets, living outside, that she'll clock out of her outreach job and then go roam the streets. She'll pack up her car with like food and water and clothing, and she'll roam the streets distributing like survival kits to people and continuing to do outreach, like from the time she gets off the clock until 1 a.m. She's literally doing nothing else with her life. That is an altruistic thing, but it's a dual relationship, right? She's engaging in multiple relationship types with these folks, right? She's doing her street outreach job, and then she's doing a more harm reduction based kind of informal outreach with folks. And that's really blurring some boundaries here. It is possible to engage in unintentional dual relationships. We've talked about this already. Living in the same neighborhood as our folks or patronizing the same shops. And then finally, another type of dual relationship is one where we gain something personally, right? I can think of, this is not a real example, but I could imagine maybe employing a client, right? Hiring a client to do some work for you, like a little odd job or something like that, right? So where we're gaining personally through this relationship at the expense of the fact that they're our client, right? And so once again, that power dynamic is there. So these are the types of dual relationships that come up. Important really to identify them quickly, disclose them to your agency. That way you're sort of covering yourself. And here is where we start to put into practice some of that stuff we talked about last section around boundaries, right? If you're noting a dual relationship, calling it out is key, right? Naming it to the client and saying, hey, I can't engage with you in this way. Or if somebody from the 12-step group drops in to see John, he might have to quickly say, hey, you know what? I'm outside of my capacity as like a peer in the 12-step program, but let's catch up later, right? Or something like that. So sort of setting that boundary as quickly as possible when we've noted a dual relationship is going to prevent some of the problems that could crop up through some of this. All right, back to you, Carlo.
Back to me. Self-disclosure. This is a fun one to talk about. I think for the sake of getting to our exercises that we want to get to, we will move through this section particularly quickly because we know what this looks like. Self-disclosure is, oh wait, did we skip a slide? Oh.
No, in this case, we like put the examples up first and then did
I
the stuff
see.
next. Yeah.
Alrighty, so we're gonna run through some examples, kind of like rapid fire. You don't have to be your best case management or social worky self. Let us know what your immediate gut reaction is to these things. Maybe out loud, we'll take maybe one per, unless anyone's really excited about one of these in particular. And we'll move through these. So a client asks you, do you have children or are you married? What's your gut reaction to this? What are you doing? Are you self-disclosing? Are you not? Have you done this before?
I talk
Rapid
to my
feedback.
clients.
Say that again, Holly.
I talk to my clients. Like, I feel like a lot of the rapport that I build with them is why they feel like they can trust me.
Awesome. It sounds like there's something there, rapport, right? That makes you feel like I should share this because this is moving in a direction that feels good for this participant or this client, and it is for them. I think that's great to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to keep it relevant towards their situation, obviously, too. Depending, I mean, yes, if a client asks me, do you have children? Absolutely. I've been there and done that. Oh, your kids aren't bothering me. They can run around this office, you know.
Absolutely. Good stuff. You might even be basically reading our next slide, like you have X-ray vision or something. Alrighty, the next one. You want to assist or encourage a client by offering previous successes or advice. Do you do it or do you not do it?
I had a client that did the same thing, and here's what they did, like that.
I've done this and I didn't assume it was self-disclosure. I'm like, well, you know what's worked for this other person that I've known in my life before? This thing. And it makes me feel like my best therapist self. Not actually, but yeah, I think I've done this before. I saw some head nods as well, so we'll move on. You have a personal reaction such as shock, disgust, or humor. What do you do? Are you displaying that shock, disgust, or humor?
Or let's say you display it, how do you like handle it next, right? Because some of these things are like surprising to us. It's like,
That's
you
true.
did what?
You can't necessarily control being shocked, right? What happens afterward? Do you address why? Do you follow up? What does that look like?
There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm sorry, this just really caught me off guard.
Yes, repair and apologies. I think feeling so helpful for our participants and for us as well. Thanks for that example, Laura. Alrighty, next one.
Before we go to the next one, I wanted to say, especially in like a harm reduction context where like wound care, for example, comes up, I have been like shocked by wounds that I've seen for people that are like injection drug users. And I've had to take that moment as like a learning opportunity to be like, okay, the next time this happens, I can't react that way, right? And so I think some of these like shock, disgust, horror, or whatever, we have to use as like learning moments so that we're then like more prepared for the next time this happens.
Thanks, Ryan. I think I hear your cat in the background. You want to display family photographs or pictures of yourself performing a hobby or winning an award. Do folks in this group do that? Or do you hold these things in different spaces? My initial reaction to this is like, you can see my hobbies and my awards. I don't know if I want you to see my family though. That's my immediate reaction to this.
Other folks, who puts photos of their family or themselves in their offices or on their desk? Yep, I see Ella.
So we have a wall in our office where we do display photos of our kids, different people within the organization. So it's in a very public, client-facing setting.
I assume that's like an intentional practice, right? But given that it's like a specific wall, you're trying to send some kind of message, I think, through that self-disclosure, right? Like we're a family welcoming place, or we're people too, or something like that. Yeah.
I don't even know that the intention was even for that. It just somebody sent a recommendation that was like, hey, we should put pictures up on this wall for Halloween, I think is when it started. And progressively through the years, we just continue to change out the photos. I mean, some people don't have kids, they have chickens, but their chickens are on the wall.
I love that. That's awesome. I'd love some little Philly chickens. We're
There
not
are
allowed,
so many Philly chickens. Yes.
but we're not allowed. There are Philly chickens that like run around the streets, but
Yeah.
you're not supposed to.
We at the coalition, we are all very familiar with Charlie's chickens. We get updates on them. If we don't hear about them for a while, we ask about them.
So
Don't
fun.
we, Holly?
We do. And so for like Halloween, we usually do a pumpkin carving thing. And so he'll take his pumpkin home so his chickens can eat it. And then that's his carved pumpkin that he puts out on his porch.
That's so creative and so thoughtful. We
It's a
like
good
Charlie.
conversation starter with clients too.
It certainly sounds that way.
When they see pictures of chickens or hear somebody talking about Charlie and his chickens, things like that kind of put people at ease.
Yeah. Putting people at ease. I think that's good. People know that you're human. And there is something under there, right? That is participant centered. I keep coming back to highlight that because that might be best practice with self-disclosure, right? I'm trying not to jump the gun. This will be the next slide. But the next example says you want to post on social media or message board. That one's very broad and vague. Do you do this in maybe if you live in a community where like your participants are also part of that community and maybe some similar or overlapping messaging boards? Are we posting?
Yeah, and message boards is a weird word. I'm thinking like Facebook groups here, right? Like, ever been in a Facebook group with a client? Anybody yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you have, Kyle?
Nope. I'm just saying that sounds like it could happen.
A lot of agencies have policies about staff and clients being friends on Facebook or, following each other on social media. They've got very specific social media policies and about the kinds of things you can post. I've removed all mention of myself from my job and my previous jobs from my social media, just so I could be a little freer with some of the things that I post. Because I don't want to get my current or former agencies in trouble for something that I'm going to own. That's me. That's not them. I'm not speaking for them. That was a conscious choice that I made. I set that boundary for myself. But I don't friend clients on any social media. I actually closed out my LinkedIn account. I never used it anyway. But I'm very protective of that space and protective of the agencies where I've worked.
Yeah, I mean, even we heard earlier from Sunshine that like just having a presence on LinkedIn, for example, ended up trickling its way into the agency, despite the fact that it really wasn't about the clients. It's not like there were like friending clients on there. I don't know what you call it on LinkedIn, connecting with clients, but it's just like that information is out there and people are going to find it. And so it's kind of a broad and hard question because it's like, well, does that mean I'm not allowed to be on social media at all if I do a care provision role? And I don't think that's the answer, but maybe part of the answer is what Laura is suggesting of like having a clear delineation between those spaces, no connection at whatsoever. And LinkedIn doesn't really allow for that because the whole purpose of it is connection between yourself and an agency and like a work history. So I don't know, something to think about.
Definitely. I know when I was an undergrad, I had a I studied music once upon a time, and one of my teachers, I added her on LinkedIn thinking, this is professional. And she told me when she saw me the next day, she said, I'm not going to add you on LinkedIn until you graduate. And I said, okay. I didn't even know I was like crossing a boundary at the time, or yeah, doing something that could jeopardize like what that relationship looks like in the workplace. All right, the last one says a client comments on your. Wait, can we put the last one up, Ryan? A client comments on your attire, such as head coverings, clothing choices, and wedding rings. How do we address this? What have you done? I know this has to have happened to people in this group before, and it doesn't have to be your best example. You could have responded poorly. I love giving examples of me doing really awful work. We need to do that. I think I do good enough work. It's okay to talk about when things don't land or don't work out. So, how have you responded to this in the past? I already saw Holly shaking their head. Yeah, this has happened. If you'd like to, feel free to engage. Trauma-informed care best practices to avoid surprises. So I don't want to like call you out, but if you'd like to share, we're all ears.
Well, I think with me, I tend to I'm good about not expressing like the reaction. And it's interesting because a client did say something like literally I was totally bumming one day and I wore the wrong shoes to work. They're like my house. Oh, hold on. Can y'all hear me good? I didn't have my microphone down. They were like my house sandals. You know what I'm saying? They're the raggedy pair of shoes. And I just meant to change, got to work and was like, crap. Like I have these funky sandals on. And he said something which it could have very much been a mental thing, but he said something about taking care of my feet. And like it bothered me. But my supervisor
That's
even
so
made the
bad.
comment about like, you know, he said those things and then he like did a little jig and she was like, you just did not respond. Like you were not emotional. Like your demeanor did not change. You just stood there stone faced, looked at him. And so, but I guess I describe myself as jaded in a way. So like you're gonna not throw things at me that surprise me very often. So I'm good at not reacting. But also it could also be that I have resting bitch face. And so I'm just gonna look like that no matter what.
Yeah, not responding at all sometimes is maybe how I respond to these things. I know I've definitely been in situations where I've been just like stumped and I just haven't said anything because I've been
Well,
stumped.
a tool I learned a long time ago is to respond to a question or a comment with a question. Because
Ooh,
sometimes clients will say things and they've got a hidden agenda, or they're trying to pick a fight, or they say something inappropriate, you know, trying to hook you or push your buttons. And so if I feel like that the question or the comment is pushing me too much for whatever reason, then I'll just respond with, well, that's an interesting question, or that's an interesting comment. Why do you say that? And I put it back on them. And then that helps me get to the heart of what they're thinking. And I haven't answered their question,
sure.
responded to
Yeah.
their comment, but I get more information out of them. Maybe they've got a legitimate reason for saying what they did, but putting it back on them helps me get to that and keeps it from being about me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, something that I've learned that I also use the word interesting when I'm feeling like I want to challenge something, or when I'm just like, I don't want to say that's stupid or that's bad or that's gross. I say, "Ah, that's interesting." And my clients in the therapy space have been like, "Oh no, why is it interesting?" When they like have caught on that like interesting maybe for me doesn't mean like such a great thing. But I appreciate that feedback, Laura, particularly for this first bullet point here. that says, a client asks, do you have children or are you married? Now this is less of a like a get under your skin example. This is like general curiosity, I think, or like exploration of like who this person is, trying to help me, for this example in particular. But I think about also answering this with a question sometimes, is like, can you tell me about why this is important to you? Right? Because we might actually answer those questions sometimes, right? And I think even Holly gave an example of why she might, right? For rapport. Ella says, I say, wow, that's crazy often. I think that's a great example too. We have these things in our speech that come up sometimes, but yeah, great ways to be responding to these things. What does Ryan say? Ryan says, that's so wild. Yeah. Alrighty, let's move on. The next slide is just here's what self-disclosure is, and then when we might actually do that. Ryan, we can put it all on the screen. Ryan actually gave a very like great and succinct example, definition of like a door relationship, just like if you exist in like similar spaces, that is not just the workspace, right? And I think similarly about the idea of self-disclosure. If you're sharing anything about your life, that is self-disclosure. That could be symbolism too, a pin on your shirt or on your jacket, your backpack, stickers, magnets on your car, with your like children's school. Ryan gave those examples earlier as well. But self-disclosure is going to be anything that reveals personal information about the helper to the participant. There is immediate disclosure and also non-immediate disclosure, which Ryan, sorry, I had a brain thing going on for a second. But immediate disclosure is going to be when the helping professional reveals how they're feeling in the moment, right? That might look like, this makes me feel really sad, right? Not in a you need to care for me sort of way, but if a client is experiencing a big emotion, maybe we are self-disclosing how we are feeling in that moment too, to align ourselves with our participants. Or, I think about that example that we started with in the beginning. I forget who opened up with this, but the idea of like the news being so like scary and what's happening in our agencies being like so scary. I think like this might also be an example of where we might use immediate disclosure and like, yeah, this actually really sucks. To align ourselves with our clients and walk alongside them in those feelings specifically. Non-immediate disclosure is going to refer to a helping professional sharing information on their life outside of the treatment space. Sometimes that looks like big family change. If you're having a baby, maybe that's something you are sharing with your participants. Also, maybe it's not. Sometimes it might include personal beliefs. If I say, oh, I went to church on Sunday and X, Y, and Z, my client might make some assumptions about me and what it means for me to be at church on Sunday, right? So that's a little bit of a distinction between immediate disclosure and not immediate disclosure. Immediate is going to be, here's what I'm feeling in the moment. Non-immediate is going to be, here's something about me that exists outside of our helping relationship, our working relationship. Your own self-disclosure of personal information should be treated with discretion. I think this depends on your role and probably also your relationship. Always ask yourself, am I sharing this for the benefit of the participant or for myself? That's kind of what I was echoing in some of the examples that you all were sharing. And in every example that you all were sharing of here's when I self-disclose, you said, here's what it's doing for the participant. And that's what is best practice, right? Is to disclose when it is going to benefit your participant, or I'd say even benefit the relationship. Is it going to build rapport? We heard that. Gain respect, influence the client opinion of you in some way. I actually think the idea of like gaining respect and influencing clients' opinions are probably not the healthiest reasons to be self-disclosing, right? But I think something like building rapport is necessary for like continued healthy and like prolonged work with a participant. We also want to consider timing, context, and agency policies. I work with some friends who work I have some friends who work in prisons, and they they're not cops, but they are like social workers, also like case management folks that work in prisons. Sounds like a really hard job to have, but there are things that they can and just can't say to the folks that they work with directly in the prison setting, and that is written policy for them. So I that's the only example I can, that maybe not the only, but that's one that comes to mind most immediately. And like maybe your agency does say something about self-disclosure. I think devices, like personal devices, might be another good example of like when this gets like tricky or messy. Maybe we're not self-disclosing our own personal contact information. If you have like a work cell or a work email, maybe we're using those solely to communicate with participants. That's another thing that I can see an agency probably writing in some sort of like policy or like handbook. Here's how we communicate. We don't communicate with personal numbers or personal emails, personal socials, that sort of thing.
All right, we're going to move on to interpersonal dynamics. Just reminding myself and reminding all of us that we're kind of going through these sections to build toward this larger conversation of like, what is ethical practice? So like how we manage dual relationships, how we manage conflicts of interest, how we manage our self-disclosure, how we manage privacy and confidentiality. These are all elements of good ethical practice, right? And so kind of the next step or another thing I want to talk about is a little bit clinical in nature, but want to talk about this idea of transference and countertransference, because these are components of our practice that are going to come up that influence whether we're doing right by our clients, right? So transference, just really quickly, is when a client has a response to a helper, any sort of feelings that a client has toward us, right? And those feelings and those reactions are unconscious. They don't sort of realize that they're happening, right? So those responses can be feelings, they could be thoughts, they can be wishes, and they project those onto us, the helper. So we may come to represent a person from their past. For example, if a client is really like anti-authority figure and they start to cast you in this role of like, why are you always constraining my behavior? Why are you putting so much rules in place for me? Really, it may have less to do with you and more to do with a projection that they have, some other thing that happened in their past that they're projecting onto you. So that's going to come up. And it may be true that you possess those same characteristics, but whether you do or not, they're going to act like you do. Where these things come from, it comes from their own past personal history. It comes from their adopted role in life. I think this is interesting in a case management context where perhaps you have a client who expects you to do everything for them. They don't want to make the phone calls. They don't want to fill out the paperwork. They don't want to go downtown to the office. They don't want to do anything. They expect you to do it all for them. And this is not 100% of the time, but it may be true that they have adopted a role in life similar to a role in life that they played in their family of origin. Maybe they were the baby of the family and all their older siblings took care of them and did everything for them. And so they're sort of taking on this same role in life in your relationship. On the flip side of the coin, we have our reactions to the client, right? Any reaction that we have toward a client is something called countertransference. And often those responses and reactions are unconscious. We don't realize they're happening. Or when we talked about shock or disgust or horror, those are unconscious reactions, right? They happen like outside of our conscious control. And often this is triggered by something a client does or says that brings up old issues for us, unresolved issues for us, right? This is one of the reasons, countertransference is one of the reasons why maybe you've heard it said that if you're a helper or if you're in case management or if you're in a supportive services role, it's important to be in your own therapy. And it's because of all the stuff that we have lived through that may show up in our work, right? And so we do our best to resolve those unresolved issues so that it doesn't cause a reaction in an inappropriate way. Here's some examples of specific reactions maybe you will experience when you're working with clients. Maybe you dread seeing a particular client. Ugh, my Tuesday 1 p.m. client is coming in today. I can't, oh my God, how am I going to get through this? Or the flip may be true. You're really anticipating, oh my goodness, I'm so excited for my Friday morning client. And we always have such fun home visits and we always get so much done. That's also an example of countertransference. So I'm trying to paint a picture that countertransference is not always a negative thing. It's simply a thing, right? Sort of value neutral. Another example, when we're thinking excessively about a client, even after work, you're like, oh, what other resources can I think of for this person? How am I going to help them navigate this situation? And you're like laying in bed at 10 p.m. That's countertransference. Another example may be being very bored by a client, right? They're just like droning on and on and on. Oh my God, I don't care. What is this that you're telling me about? That's countertransference, right? So any of those reactions. And of course, I think it's really important for me to note here that like all of these reactions, both the client side and our side, are very natural. These are human interactions that we're having. And in fact, it's only going to be problematic when these reactions start to affect our decision making. When I'm dreading seeing that client, and so I call out of work, that starts to become a problem, right? I'm really looking forward to seeing this one client, so I'll cancel another client who needs my help too in order to meet with this one. And so these are, and why we're sort of slotting countertransference and transference into an ethics training is that these reactions that we have are going to play a role in our ethical dilemmas, right? When somebody pulls on our heartstrings, or when we really don't like a client for whatever reason, that's going to play a role in how we make ethical decisions about their care. So how do we manage it? Number one is going to be utilizing supervision, right? If you're having a reaction of any kind, it's important to go right to your supervisor. If hopefully you have like weekly or biweekly chances to talk about your work with your supervisor, utilizing supervision to talk about these reactions. And what we're doing in that supervision is attempting to develop some insight about those reactions, right? I'm thinking about, what does this client remind me of? Is there some painful experience from my past that's being stirred here? Am I making judgments about this client based on my own values? And the answer is yes, by the way. We're always doing that. Are my objectives congruent in parallel with what the client wants for themselves? I just did this thing with this client. If I could do it all over again, would I do the same thing again? So I'm asking these questions of myself and with my supervisor to develop some insight about those reactions in order to have them not affect the care that I give folks. Another way of managing empathy is sort of like another way of managing our reactions is by increasing our empathy and doing some anxiety management. And ultimately, don't avoid your own unresolved stuff. If you have stuff from your past that is being stirred, you owe it to your clients to deal with that, right? So it's not going to affect the work that you do with them. I'm going to skip through a little bit because I want to get to this next section. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so we're like in like the final home stretch here, and we're going to spend the last bit of this training talking about specific ethical principles and how we apply them, and then we'll break down some cases and some breakout groups. So Khalil, I'll kick it over to you to talk about these ethical principles. Oh, actually, let me just do this part here, Khalil. I want to invite you to engage. I have another poll for you here. And what I'm going to ask is that I'm going to show you a screen that has a bunch of different ethical principles, and you'll be able to move them up and down or rank order them, right? And so what I want you to do is, for you, rank order each of these ethical principles. How would you place them in order of a priority for you in your practice with clients? So I'll launch it here. So 1 would be the highest ranking. 7 would be the lowest ranking. I'll give folks a few minutes to do that.
Would you read what the headings are?
Oh, is it not showing them what they are?
We just got part of it and then ...
Oh, okay. Protection of life,
Okay.
autonomy, privacy and confidentiality, quality of life, autonomy and freedom, least harm, equality and inequality. I'm not sure if I said that one already.
So I see privacy and confidentiality is, you didn't call that one, did you?
Yes, that one is one of them. Yes. I may have not said that. You're right. Privacy and confidentiality is also there.
Can you help me? My little screen disappeared, the one that was showing what you had posted here on the screen.
Oh, the poll disappeared for you?
It
Yeah.
disappeared on my screen. I don't know how it disappeared. I
Let
tried
me
to
see if I
expand
can-
it and it disappeared.
Oh no. I don't know how to relaunch it without ending it and
Oh, you can
doing
just
it
read.
all
You can
over.
just read it. Read them for me, and I can choose.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Privacy and confidentiality,
Mm-hmm.
least harm,
Least harm.
autonomy and freedom.
Hold on.
Mhm.
Autonomy.
Mhm.
Okay, then.
Ooh, I see I have autonomy twice. That's the problem. Equality and inequality.
Quality and inequality.
And
Okay.
protection of life.
Protection of life.
Did I say them all? I'm not sure. Quality of life.
You said privacy. What was the second one? You said privacy, autonomy and freedom, equality and inequality, protection of life. And the last one was?
Two more. Least harm.
Or least harm.
And quality of life.
Quality of life. Okay. With 7 being the highest, eh?
7 being the lowest. So the thing that you care about the most personally should be your number 1 slot.
Okay. Okay.
I think this poll turned out more strangely than I was hoping that it would turn out, but hopefully I see a couple people have finished. Still waiting on others to folk. Is this not working for anybody, or do you have other questions? Let me see if I can. Okay, I'll shut up and let you work. All right, I got 6 responses in, waiting for a couple more. Okay, let me give it 30 more seconds and then I'll close the poll. All right, I'm going to close the poll now.
I'm going to have to go out and come back in. The whole screen went off on me too.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. Should be able to pop right back in without being in a waiting room. Okay, let me share the results of this. Now I'm realizing, I'm so sorry, folks, that autonomy was listed twice, and one of those was supposed to say truthfulness and full disclosure. So I apologize for that. I made an error there. So I'm sharing the screen here. Let's see what we have. The greatest proportion of people put protection of life as the highest
Yes.
value there. Yep. Protecting life. And then let's see, kind of a bit of an even split, but oh no, almost quite a direct even split. The most for lowest that people put was privacy and confidentiality. But we also see equality and inequality listed there, and autonomy listed there as the lowest. Let's see. One person put autonomy and freedom as their highest, and another put quality of life as their highest. Very interesting. So we've got some like divergent views here in terms of like what values are important, and which I absolutely love, because that's going to directly influence how you make decisions in an ethical environment or when there's an ethical dilemma. So exciting to see some differences here. All righty. So again, here are the full list.
And this is a hierarchy, right, Ryan?
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah. Do you want to talk about maybe the first couple, and then I'll talk about the next couple, and we'll try and go through this kind of quickly instead of like the big breakdown of each of them?
Yeah, no problem. So that first principle there. So when we say this is a hierarchy, this is an exam. Ethics look different for many professions. Social work ethics feel really relevant to the work that we do. So this is from this is a social work framework here. So that first ethical principle is protection of life. So this is what this means is that biological life must always take precedence over any other principles, because it is in the context of life that ethical decisions are made. So that other places and in other professions might call this like preserving life, right? Is what that might sound like. But even just saying that, Ryan and I had this conversation recently about this specifically, like the idea of protection of life sounds like it's opening up a can of like a pro-life versus like pro-choice debate here. And I'm not sure it's that, well, I know it's not that entirely, but I think what is important to note is that I have this written down somewhere to say about this because I knew it was going to come up. Here we go. Every social worker, every agency, straight from the notes, every supervisor, all of our agencies are going to view these things differently. They're going to have a different definition for what protecting life means, right? And we see that a lot. I really, really don't want to talk about abortion, but I feel like that's the thing that's coming up with this one for sure, in just like the language that's being used. But there are people on like the pro-choice side of this debate that say they are protecting life, and there are people on the pro-life side of this debate that also say they are protecting life, right? So our definitions and our understanding of these terms will vary greatly across the board, per clinician, per case manager, per agency, maybe, right? So that second principle is the principle of equality and inequality. So this really prioritizes fairness and justice for all persons to access to and benefit from care. Equal quality in processes, procedures, and services. Taking precautions to mitigate potential biases and unjust practices. The cookie cutter scenario we have that we talk about being pretty hard and challenging to implement, right? To treat everybody the same is really quite difficult because we know not everybody comes with the same needs. But when we're talking about equality and inequality, that might actually mean that when similar concerns or conflicts come up, we're navigating them pretty similarly across the board, regardless of who that person is or who that participant is. Relevant and significant. Ooh, alrighty, let's move right on. Okay, wait. Autonomy and freedom. let's go. The Am I frozen? Can you guys hear me and see me okay?
I think you were frozen for a moment, but you're back.
Okay, great. So even just the word autonomous has this meaning here at its root, right? Auto and nomos is self-rule, just the ability to be in charge of yourself and your own decisions for your brain, your body, your heart, your behaviors. Client's autonomy and self-determination should always be considered. Respect for choices, decisions, and behaviors, regardless of what they look like or how stigmatized they are. And the right to make risky decisions, right? Our clients and us will take risks in our lives and hopefully grow from those risks and those experiences. Least harm. This is probably one that folks hear a lot across professions, or like do no harm might also sound familiar to folks. But helpers should avoid causing harm and prevent harm from occurring to clients or others. Some harm is intentional, while other harm is unintentional. And if there are no good options, choose the course of least harm. We hear that a lot. I think in medical decision making a lot, this is like the process, right? What's going to harm this person the least if the treatment that they're going to engage in is going to be damaging to their body in like some capacity? They might choose a treatment that is the least damaging or harmful to their bodies. Do you want to grab the next ones, Ryan?
Yeah. So the next one is quality of life. And I actually hate this ethical principle, mostly because it is so subjective, right? Like some of the other ones, I guess, too. But our goal, the ethical call here is to enhance the quality of life of our clients and others involved in our care. My problem with it is it's so subjective that quality of life looks different sort of culturally, across people, across class. The things that I think lead to a quality life are not the same things that lead to a quality life for you in some cases, right? And our clients in some cases. So while I get the importance of it, we want people to live a life of quality. I think it's hard when we have to make decisions on behalf of our clients about their quality of life. When we can ask them, when we can ask dad whether he wants to go into a nursing home or have home care, and he's able to answer us with a sort of, free and clear cognitive capacity, fine. But often it's an ethical dilemma when that's not possible, right? When he can't answer that question in a way that we feel confident he is able to. And so we're stuck trying to make the decisions ourselves. The next one is privacy and confidentiality. Of course, we did this whole section earlier on this, but it is one of the ethical principles. The piece that I'll add here is we ask our clients to tell us a lot, right? And when we do trauma-informed care, part of that conversation is making sure that we're going slow enough and asking for consent. Can I ask you this question? Would it be okay if we talked about this? And I think maybe there are times when we ask our clients to divulge too much information. Do we really need to know this about their lives in order to provide good care? Maybe, maybe not. So trying to kind of increase the level of safety by ensuring that we're holding their confidentiality tightly. And of course, knowing that maybe there are times when we'll break confidentiality. Truthfulness and full disclosure. This is the one that was not on the poll. Again, apologies. But the idea behind this ethical principle is that we should be honest with people and about people. Providing full and truthful information to folks is part of our ethical call, right? Well, the care can look this way, or these are the steps, or no, actually, the housing list is 10 years long and you're probably never going to get housing that way. Let's look for other options, right? So that truthfulness, that full disclosure is part of good practice. And of course, the reason for that is it supports a more trustful relationship, right? If you're constantly sort of like sharing half truths with your client, whether they find out that or not, it doesn't feel good to me, right? If they find out that you've been like sort of sharing half truths, that relationship is probably broken, hopefully not beyond repair. But even if not, I have a hard time sitting with either lying directly or indirectly to folks. I don't feel like I'm showing up through an authentic way, right? And when I'm not being authentic, it's hard to develop that rapport, at least personally. These are a hierarchy, as we mentioned, and sometimes these will go against one another. Sometimes these principles will be in conflict with one another. And this is what we mean by an ethical dilemma, right? So a couple of things here. Protecting survival, in other words, protecting somebody's life, is going to overrule being truthful or protecting their quality of life, right? So we may lie to a person if the end result is we get to protect their life, right? We get to keep them alive. Similarly, quality of life. I don't think anybody would describe being in like involuntary hospitalization as being a high quality of life. And in fact, it's quite traumatic for folks. But we're saying in this case, we might allow that to be true if we can save their life through this involuntary commitment, right? The next one is one person's right to well-being or quality of life overrules another person's right to self-determination. In other words, just because I'm respecting your autonomy doesn't mean you get to go do harm to somebody else, right? It is not an acceptable use of your autonomy to harm another person. But the other part of that is it is an acceptable use of your autonomy to harm yourself, according to this framework, right? And that is, in fact, where we get our ideas around harm reduction. Like, yeah, the things that you're doing to yourself right now are causing you harm. And we want to be truthful and honest about that. But it's your decision. You can do it. It's your body, right? That's what self-determination means in that context. This is an interesting one. Voluntary consent to laws and rules overrules our right to act in disagreement with them. So if I sign an agreement that I'm going to follow X, Y, and Z rules, think of a rental agreement, for example. I don't then get to turn around and disagree with them because it violates my autonomy. Well, I don't want to pay rent. It violates my autonomy. Sorry, you voluntarily consented to this use and occupancy agreement or rental agreement. You're going to have to pay it. And then a person's right to well-being may overrule certain laws or rules, etc., especially in the case that those laws or rules are unjust or causing harm. Okay, I'm going to skip that last one. Khalil, I want to check in with you about next steps here. We do have some case scenarios, but we also have some other content. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think professional judgment, I think we covered some of this in like the idea of like self-disclosure. When are we doing it? I think we should move to some practice stuff.
Cool, let's do it. Okay, so here's our ethical framework. We've talked a little bit about ethical dilemmas. I want to define that. An ethical dilemma is when we encounter a conflict between our professional duties and our values, and we have to decide which of those takes precedence. Alternatively, when two of our values are in conflict. So for me, if I was rank ordering those list of principles, I would probably put autonomy at the top. That's the thing that I value more than many of those other things. I think probably truthfulness is up there as well. Quality of life is low down. I already shared my funky feelings about that, right? But let's say that autonomy and truthfulness come into conflict. That's when I have an ethical dilemma, where there's not actually a right answer. There's no one right way to do this work. And we have to resolve this conflict that exists within ourselves, right? I'll say also that a lot of times, so I spend a lot of time in like education spaces for like new social workers, like in grad school setting. And many times newer people to practice think everything is like an ethical issue, right? They're like pointing at ethical issues all the time. And in fact, I think that's probably not the case. I think there are a bunch of aspects of care work that is more about non-ethical things. For example, Which intervention are we going to use? How do we write our notes? Where do we conduct our practice? Do we collect fees for our practice? How do we assess? What tools do we use? These are not elements of like ethics, right? Because ethics ultimately comes down to like what is right and what is wrong. And so I think sometimes people get confused thinking everything is an ethical issue. You're not using the right intervention, but that's not necessarily an ethics issue unless the intervention we're using is causing harm, right? Okay. So we'll have competing values. And this would be those values that I talked about, equality versus confidentiality, or like protecting life versus confidentiality. But we'll also have competing loyalties, right? We're loyal to our agencies. They're the ones who pay our bills, right? But we're also loyal to our clients. And so those things come in conflict sometimes. Okay. All right. We like flew through that ethical framework. I apologize. But it's going to come up again. I would love to kind of walk through this ethical dilemma with you. So get your mics ready, get your typing fingers ready. I'm going to read this case out loud and just kind of have you talk through it with me. So this is Louisa. A community-based organization provides services specifically targeted toward an immigrant minority population. These services include case management, alcohol and drug treatment, advocacy, and housing. Another client of the agency refers Louisa for services, and she is assigned to a caseworker. She's 18 years old, she's homeless, and she's mentally disabled. Although her family resides in a nearby county, she refuses contact with them, preferring to live independently on the city streets. Louisa is placed in a home, but she runs away, presumably returning to the unsafe neighborhood where she had been living. The worker loses contact with her. A week later, through the client who originally referred her, the worker learns that Louisa has been sexually and physically abused. The worker is concerned about her safety, fearing further sexual assault, murder, and violence if this young woman continues to live on the streets. They feel that Louisa does not have the mental capacity to look out for herself and take even elementary precautions to prevent harm. When they contact her on the street, Louisa is adamant. She desires to remain in the neighborhood which she's come to know. She does not desire agency involvement, housing, or other services. All that she asks is that she be left alone to live as she wishes. She's not harming or disturbing anyone and wishes to live as she chooses. Her mental status, in terms of her disability, has not been legally determined, so the presumption must be that she's competent. However, her mental limitations are immediately apparent, and Louisa is at a risk of harm if she continues to live on the streets. Okay. Here's my first question. Do you see an ethical dilemma here? Does this actually seem like a dilemma to you? Is this hard, kind of complicated or complex enough to rise to the level of a dilemma? And then which things are in? If we define an ethical dilemma as a conflict between those ethical principles or our values, what do you see here? What are the ethical, or excuse me, what are the values that are coming up for this case manager that might be in conflict? It's a lot, but I'm curious just to kind of gut reactions. I think also you can refer back to here. You can refer back to this list. Maybe I should just type it. Protection of life is one thing that comes up. Truthfulness and full disclosure. Equity. Yep. Self-determination and autonomy. Quality of life. Yeah, I see Mercedes has really like hit the nail on the head here, right? The things that are in conflict are Louisa's self-determination. I want to do what I want to do. I want to live where I want to live, and I don't want you to be involved. Versus Louisa's safety. And I think there's one other thing at issue here. I wonder if anybody else has ideas. Anything else coming up besides self-determination and safety? Thanks, Bobby. Seeing your agreement there. What about Luisa's mental status? So Luisa is exercising self-determination, or she's attempting to, but the case management staff is not necessarily sure that she's competent, and that maybe increases the safety risk, right? Okay. Gut reaction, what would you do? What are your next steps as a case manager? No, I lost you. Wake up. We're almost done. Come back to me, my people.
Right here with you.
Okay, I hear you. What are you doing, Darlene? What's your next step? You don't have to have all the answers, but I'm just curious. What's your takeaway, and what are you thinking here so far?
Can you be a little more specific?
Well, I've got a whole case here, and it's complicated, right? Luisa was just sexually assaulted. We're afraid it's going to happen again. She's living outside. She's not living in her unit, but she doesn't want us involved. What do you do in that situation? What are your next steps? I see you, Bobby, trying to convince a mental evaluation. Can you say a little bit more, Bobby? What are you hoping that occurs from that? Like, what do you see as the short term and the long term of that?
Oh, it's a little complex. Let's see.
Okay, so the short term is to understand her mental disability for Bobby.
But how do we convince her to, it's difficult because although she's been assaulted, but the sense of belonging that she has, like, being there. Yes, she got assaulted, but this is her turf, her community. So it's difficult, like to pull her because now she's gonna have to fear the unknown, at least, like, yes, she got assaulted, but at least there are people there that she still perhaps trusts or she feels comfortable navigating that area because she knows, like this is a familiarity aspect of it. But it's tough. How do you remove her? Because, how do you protect her? What do you do? It's hard because you can't take her by force. And you can't convince her. It's hard to reason, especially if she has those limitations, cognitive limitations. Whew.
Yeah, thanks for thinking through that. I mean, you're right, Darlene. It is not an easy case. It is a complex case.
It is
And this person is an adult, right? We can't
Right.
coerce. We cannot
No.
coerce her into doing what we want for her, right? From my perspective, a higher quality of life would be to live inside your apartment unit rather than being out on the street, right? You're in our program. You have been accepted to this program. Come on inside.
Right.
But that's not where she's feeling be, right?
What do we do?
So let me read some of these other comments here. Some other folks have chimed in. John says there are a few legal actions that are meaningful. There are a few legal actions that are meaningful. No. Sorry, John. I'm misrepresenting your words. There are few legal actions that are meaningful. Effective outreach. Build a relationship that meets the client where they are, both in terms of geography and motivation. I like what you're thinking, John. We're never going to convince her to do something like a mental evaluation without a relationship with her, right? We need to know her. We need to know where she's at, where she spends her time, what she gets out of it. I like that. Bobby's saying you have to get to the root of the problem, which I think, Bobby, you mean by that the mental disability part of it, but I could be wrong. Mercedes is saying, ask her reasoning for wanting to live on the streets to see if there are fears we could address and work on. Maybe there's something that's serving as a barrier. Absolutely. I like that idea. John is saying, I'm not an outreach worker, but is this a case where they have meaningful involvement? I think if they don't, they should. Absolutely. If we are a case manager who in a supportive housing setting and we're not collaborating with an outreach worker in this case, I think we're not doing all the things that we need to do. So yes, I think that should be involved. I would try to take a MIW if I am her caseworker. I don't know if I know that acronym. What's an MIW?
Mental inquest when somebody is a danger to themselves or others.
Okay.
You can go to the court. It's a pretty involved process, and even if you get one approved, then you have to have the police pick the person up and take them to the hospital, and there's no guarantee that the hospital will keep them.
I see. Yeah, we call that a 302 here in PA. Got it. It's recently been renamed. Got it. Okay. Okay. Let me move us along. We're getting close to end time, and I want to show you this framework as a way to kind of understand Louisa's case. So I would consider this an ethical dilemma because people have a right to harm themselves. We say that in a drug context, right? And so self-determination is held in high regard, and that autonomy is held in high regard. She's not harming anybody else. But also her safety is at risk, and we're not sure that she can correctly or ably evaluate her own level of safety. Okay, so this is an ethical dilemma for that reason. So I want to kind of walk you through these stages of ethical decision making. It is a framework that you can use, and I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now to a document that has this on it. I want you to feel free to use this as you kind of engage in your practice. You can download that from that link. But the first one says identify the ethical issues. So we identified some competing things, some competing values. One was self-determination and another was safety. The second step would be to identify those who were impacted and to seek help. So as we're thinking through this case, thinking about who might be impacted, Louisa, of course, is impacted by whatever decision we make. Louisa's family, if she has any, might be impacted by the decisions being made. Our organization is impacted, right? Depending on the decision we make, we're either going to have one less unit to house somebody, or there are legal consequences if she is harmed and she's in our care, etc. So whatever decision we make is going to fall back on the organization as well. And now we need to determine appropriate help. So obviously we're pulling in the supervisor, we're pulling in any coworkers or colleagues. And I think in that case, John, I think correctly identified maybe an outreach worker as a useful person, somebody who knows how to engage people on the street, who has that effective, assertive engagement sort of training and technique exposure. Sometimes agencies have an ethics committee. So I threw that one in there, where any decision that kind of rises to the level of an ethical dilemma will kind of rise through the ranks of an agency where you get some additional support. Alternatively, maybe there's a case consultation type thing. Maybe we can consider this a case consultation. Sometimes it might be necessary to contact a liability insurance provider. I'm sure that would be on a director of compliance, not on a case manager to do that work, but they might be helpful too. Licensing and certification boards. We talked about codes of ethics earlier. And so I think one kind of critical step in making an ethical decision is to consult your code of ethics, right? If you're a peer specialist, if you're a social worker, there's even a code of ethics for case managers. And so sort of consulting that code of ethics and seeing if anything stands out to you in terms of direction for practice. And I think the client themselves, Louisa herself, maybe is somebody that can help, right? And I think you all kind of nodded to this earlier in your ideas, which is ask her why. Ask her what's going on. What does she like about this place? Maybe being truthful and disclosing to say, hey, I'm really concerned about your safety, but I also want to respect your wishes, that you don't want involvement with us. Can we talk about next steps? What should I do, right? I think involving her in these decisions is an important part of the process. Any friends or family members we can pull in to help would be useful. Step 3 is to think critically. And so here's where we reflect on all the relevant factors and the context. I think the MIW information is relevant context here that you all brought up. It's going to take some time and energy. Maybe we don't have enough information. Maybe it's not going to be effective because they assess her and they send her back out on the street because there's no reason to hold her, right? She's not a harm to herself or others. What other factors and context? The neighborhood that she lives in is a relevant factor or context. Your own agency's rates of keeping people in their apartments is relevant context. We've housed a lot of people at our agencies where they don't sleep inside for the first month or two because that's uncomfortable for them, right? So that's not that uncommon. So that's relevant context. Consider multiple perspectives. Maybe there's somebody in your crew of people talking about this that believes this person is not able to make this decision for themselves. And so we need to pursue that line of thinking. Tell me why. Tell me what are all the reasons. Why do you believe we need to strip this person's autonomy? To what benefit? What's your argument, right? On the other hand, somebody may feel more strongly about autonomy, and we need to let them make their case as well, and start to brainstorm some options based on this, right? And importantly, we need to assess the consequences. If we do the MIW, here are the steps that are going to occur. If we try and ask her, convince her to do maybe some more cognitive assessment, what are the consequences of that? How's it going to play out, right? Sort of walking down each of the possibilities and understanding what are next steps of each of them. We'll examine the pros and cons. If we do this, this is going to happen. If we do this, this is going to happen, right? For and against each action, we're looking at our code of ethics once again. We're even bringing our personal values into question, right? I think sometimes we think that the personal and the professional have to be totally separate, but I think that's a little bit naive. We are always bringing our personal selves into these decisions, right? Would I do the same thing for my parent or for my kid? That stuff is always present, whether it's conscious or not. And so reflecting on that in more intentional ways. Finally, we make our decision. Once we've done all the pros and cons, we've weighed it, we make the decision and we document it. And so part of that documentation is to indicate this felt like an ethical dilemma. It is this and this at issue. It's self-determination versus safety at issue. The team got together and discussed the pros and cons, and we made this decision, right? I think it's important to document the process that you underwent to make an ethical decision. You see on the screen here, it says the golden medium. It says not too much detail and not too brief. I think it's always better to write more. And I think it is fair for you to not feel 100% about every decision. Like, it might suck to not have her live in the unit, but that might be the decision that you make, right? And so it's kind of doing the least harm. That's the concept here. And we need to document that. And then finally, exploring ways to evaluate success, right? Maybe we can check back in with Louisa in a month if we decide we're not going to do anything. Maybe we do the mental evaluation and she's judged to be competent. Do we feel like we've done enough then, right? Well, okay, if she's competent, then does that mean she can make her own decision? We have to be able to sort of like evaluate our decisions and maybe do some follow-up as far as next steps. Whew, I speed ran that ethical framework. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm respecting your boundaries and your time as we start to wrap up here. Can I check in with you, Kalo? What are you feeling as far as next steps?
As far as next steps, I don't think breakout room activity, because we have, what, 5 minutes left?
Yeah. Okay. So let's do maybe some
I
key
think
takeaways.
key takeaway sounds good to me.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, folks, for bearing with us. This is a long training, and you all have been champs. I appreciate the folks that are still typing and still talking. Okay. Here are our key takeaways. Ethical dilemmas are going to happen all the time. We've heard from you already that you're experiencing 3 or 4 ethical dilemmas in a year, right? That's pretty regular. That's quarterly. put it on your quarterly report, file it on your quarterly taxes. Ethical decision making is a skill that we develop through practice, also through self-reflection of our own values, and through discussion with others. I think if there's another takeaway that I would share, we should not be making ethical decisions, ethical dilemma resolutions in a vacuum. You should be talking about this stuff with as many people as you can. You're going to hear different perspectives that are going to challenge you from different points of view and through a different value set, and that is crucial to providing the best care to folks. Boundaries, as we talked about, are there to protect you and your client and your agency. And so we want to have a broad understanding about boundaries. Dual relationships, transference, countertransference, these things are going to come up. They're inevitable. It's important to stay aware, to highlight them, to note them, to talk to our supervisors about them, so that we can do a little CYA and so we can do the best practice that we can. And of course, violations of boundaries, violations of ethics and confidentiality can have really serious consequences. In fact, for example, the consequences of HIPAA are significant financial penalties, certainly more than anybody in this room makes in a year for a given violation. So just wanted to kind of note the significant consequences there. Best practice, always err on the side of caution. And when in doubt, ask your supervisor. All right. That's our spiel for you today. I'll give you some quick next steps. We would invite folks to complete the evaluation, the session evaluation for this session. I am dropping a link to that in the chat right now. There's the evaluation. It should take you about 3 minutes to complete that eval. We hope you'll give us some feedback. If you complete that evaluation, that is the only way that you can receive a certificate of attendance. So if you're needing that certificate of attendance for your case management journey here, please make sure you complete that evaluation and it will automatically send it to you within the next 2 hours. I would say another next step that I have for you is to print this document, the stages of ethical decision making, and consider one of your tough cases through the lens of this framework as practice for managing ethical dilemmas. All right, folks. Thanks so much again for spending this time with us. We've appreciated you. We've appreciated your patience and your commitment. That's all we got for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan, Khalil. I always appreciate what you have to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura. It's great seeing you again. Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.